Atascadero, and I will ask Councilmember Newsom to lead us in a pledge to the flag.
Please rise if you can.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Borbo,
Here.
Councilmember Daris,
Here.
Councilmember Newsom,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Funk,
Here.
Mayor Moreno,
Here.
all present.
Thank you. Well, if you are attending here in person, and there's a few of you here, welcome. If you're on Zoom, KPRL 1230, on Channel 20, on YouTube, wherever you are watching or listening to the City Council meeting, we welcome you. If you are not currently online, but would like to call in during community forum or for public comment on any of the items that are appearing on the agenda this evening, you can do so by calling into the following number, 669-900-6833. Let me give you that number one more time. It's 669-900-6833. And then you'll be asked for a meeting ID. That meeting ID is 889-2347-9018. Again, 889-2347-9018. And also, if you go to atascadero.org and you pull down a copy of the agenda, the very front page will have that information for you. So now I will ask for an approval of the agenda.
Move approval of the agenda.
I'll second.
We have a motion by Councilmember Barbeau, a second by Mayor Pro Tem Funk. We will waive the reading in full of all ordinances appearing on this agenda, and the titles of the ordinances will be read aloud by the city clerk at the first reading after the motion and before the city council votes. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Borbo,
Yes.
Councilmember Daris,
Yes.
Councilmember Newsom,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Funk,
Yes.
Mayor Moreno,
Yes, ma'am.
motion passes.
Thank you. And now I will ask our city attorney, Mr. Perrick, if there is any reportable action from our closed session on April 19th.
There's no reportable action from that meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Perrick. Next item on our agenda is a proclamation or a presentation, a proclamation to Lumen Alliance in recognition of Sexual Assault Action Month, and receiving this is Sam Gottlieb. And so I will go ahead and read the proclamation, and then we will ask to hear a few words from you if you like. Whereas Sexual Assault Action Month calls attention to the fact that sexual and intimate partner violence is widespread and can affect people from any background in any community. And whereas Rise and Stand Strong officially merged on July 1st, 2021 to form Lumina Alliance, an agency that serves survivors of sexual and intimate partner violence throughout all of San Luis Obispo County. And whereas, although progress has been made toward preventing and ending sexual violence and providing support to survivors and their families, important work remains to be done. And whereas there is a need to focus on the individualized needs of sexual violence survivors, and whereas the marginalization of certain groups in society, including undocumented individuals, transgender individuals, and those living with disabilities, increases their vulnerability to sexual violence. And whereas Lumina Alliance continues to provide a safe environment to those affected by sexual violence with crisis intervention, counseling, education, and emergency safe housing with the help of dedicated volunteers and professionals. And whereas Lumina Alliance provided services to 1,472 people in 2022, including answering 2,440 calls from the crisis hotline, and provided 417 survivors with more than 6,200 therapy hours. And whereas Lumina Alliance encourages the community to recognize our collective power to create a culture that simultaneously supports survivors and nurtures a world where everyone can live free from violence. And whereas the city of Atascadero strongly supports the efforts of Lumina Alliance, how every segment of our society can work together to better address sexual violence and how to help survivors connect with services. Now therefore be it resolved that I, Heather Moreno, on behalf of the entire city council, in recognition of the important work done by sexual violence programs, do hereby proclaim the month of April 2023 to be National Sexual Assault Action Month. And welcome forward, Sam.
Oh, yes, it is. Just talking to it. Thank you so very much, Mayor Moreno and the rest, all of you on the city council. I am immensely proud of Lumina Alliance and the work that we do. Just to introduce myself, my name is Sam Gottlieb. I am the Chief People and Culture Officer at Lumina Alliance, which means I support all of our folks who are doing this incredible work in the community. And so I'm very, very fortunate to have the job that I do. And it's very moving to have that work recognized. So thank you so much. I think that's about it for me. You summed up what we do very, very succinctly. So thank you again very much, everybody.
Absolutely. Thank you. And for the work you and your colleagues do. And if you'd like, we'll come forward. We'll take a picture. All right. We're moving on to our consent calendar, and the consent calendar contains items that are considered to be routine and non-controversial by city staff and can be approved in one motion unless there is a member of the public or the council wishing to pull an item. So we'll ask if there's any member of the council wishing to pull an item. Seeing none, I will look to any members of the public. I will go to Zoom here. Let me find if there's any member on the webinar that wishes to pull something. You could raise your hand now. All right, I'm not seeing anybody and no one on the phone loop that I don't see in Zoom. All right, I'll bring that back to council for a motion.
I'll move approval of the consent calendar.
I'll second.
Motion by Councilmember Barbeau, a second by Councilmember Newsome. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Borbo,
Yes.
Councilmember Daris,
Yes.
Councilmember Newsome,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Funk,
Yes.
Mayor Moreno.
Yes, ma'am.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Moving on to the updates from our city manager, Ms. Rickert.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. The first thing I want to talk about tonight is the Waste Management Residential Waste Drop-Off Week. It's actually one of my favorite weeks of the year. Get rid of a bunch of stuff that's laying around. So now through April 29th, Waste Management will be offering free drop-off for Atascadero customers from 7:30 a.m. to 3 p.m. at Chicago Grade Landfill. This event makes it easy for residents to dispose of extra or large item residential waste at no cost. Non-acceptable items are debris generated from commercial construction or commercial landscaping, and the event is open to all Atascadero Waste Management customers. Now, a voucher is required. You can't just bring your stuff to the dump and say, I'm a Waste Management customer. You actually need to get a voucher, but it is very easy. You can either call Waste Management and they will get you all set up and get you your voucher right away, or stop by their office on Pueblo Avenue. Very, very simple. In addition, now through April 29th, paper shredding will be available at their customer service center located at 8740 Pueblo Avenue. And that paper shredding is going to be available from 8:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. And if you have any questions, please contact Waste Management at 805-466-3636. So just give Waste Management a call and they're very helpful. We also have another fun event. Our 9th annual Brew at the Zoo is this Saturday from 5:30 to 8:30 p.m. So get ready to experience over 19 craft breweries, ciders, distilled spirits, and wineries in a commemorative glass, plus a chance to visit all of our animals at the zoo. It is in the evening, so it's kind of fun to see some of those more nocturnal animals moving around a little bit more than we're used to, and some of that. And we are excited to announce that we will have Garden Party Band, Dante Marsh and the Vibe Setters, and a live DJ from Medina Light Show and Design hosting the hula hoop dance and costume contest. There will be food for purchase from a variety of food trucks too. Tickets are on sale now online for only $40 a person. They will increase to $50 a person the night of the gate. Please get your tickets in advance. I'm the one that sells the tickets at the event. And I'm the one that gets to tell people, I'm sorry, we're sold out. You can't come. So please don't make me do that because I really don't like doing that. Please get them in advance. Make sure you have a ticket. That way you can come. We always do have some tickets available that night, but not a lot. So it's time to get out the animal costumes, dress up and have fun, all while raising money for the Charles Paddock Zoo. And we have Tamale Festival. So mark your calendar for the 7th annual Tamale Festival and plan your Cinco de Mayo weekend with a sneak peek at tamale vendors on Friday, May 5th, along with enjoying the First Friday Sip and Shop hosted by the Atascadero Chamber of Commerce. First Friday kicks off the downtown at 5:30 p.m. along with the A-Town Downtown Passport to get stamped from your favorite retail stores, and experience complimentary tours of City Hall and potential fireworks at 8 p.m. if weather is permitting. We're drying out. However, I took a sneak peek and there is some rain in the forecast. So there is a chance. It's Thursday so far, Terry. You're in good shape so far. The main Tamale Festival is set for Saturday, May 6th from 11 to 7 p.m. and will bring all of the entertainment that you are used to enjoying, from the dancing horses to the folklorica dancers to mariachi, along with a variety of bands to dance to, and over 100 vendors, 30 of them tamale vendors. We have all sorts of contests and awards. You get to vote for your favorite tamale vendors, plus the tamale judging. It is a lot of fun, and it'll be nice to have it here in May. And then we have Pedal to the Garden in celebration of Bike to Work Week. The city is hosting Pedal to the Gardens on Tuesday, May 16th from 7:30 to 9 a.m. in front of City Hall steps on Palma. Bicyclists of all ages are welcome. Light breakfast and refreshments will be available, and this is done in partnership with Slow Cog and K-Man Cyclery. And for all of our event information, we had a bunch of events that took place over the last couple of weekends. Earthshine did an amazing job in the creek. We had Party for the Planet. That was a lot of fun events. So looking forward for future events, go to visitatascadero.com/events. And we have a lot of information right there for everybody interested. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions of the city manager? I'm not seeing anything. We got a lot of good stuff going on. And so a few years ago, I decided I would no longer do any food judging because it is just way too much. But I can't say no to Terry. So I do the tamale judging. You can see she was like, what? So really looking forward to that event. Top notch. All right. We will move on to Let's see, community forum. Community forum is the portion of our meeting that is reserved for persons wishing to address the council regarding an item that isn't on our agenda this evening, but over which we have jurisdiction. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes, and we will have a total of 30 minutes available for community forum. So when you come to the podium or come on to Zoom, we just ask you state your name for the record, and we will have a timer going to just so you can keep track of your time frame. So with that, I will open up to community forum. And if there's any member in Zoom that would like to speak, go ahead and raise your hand. If there's any member here in the public, come on forward. And do not wait because I'm not seeing hands raised. So let's do that now. If there's anyone on Zoom, raise your hand. All right, I'm not seeing anyone. So last chance. You know, sometimes people hang out, they like to be the last one, or they're just maybe nervous, but don't be nervous. All right, well, we'll go ahead and close community forum. And because we didn't have any individuals wishing to speak at this time, community forum will remain open until 6. Oh, we got one. All right. Sheila New. Welcome.
I wasn't sure if I could speak now or I needed to wait till it actually was on page 198, but about the documentary.
Yeah, if you're speaking on an item that is on the agenda later tonight, you will wait for that agenda item.
Okay. Do you have any idea when page 198 is going to?
Page 198 is that the broadband? Oh, the work
No,
plan.
it was
that
downtown
will,
economic.
yeah, that will be towards the end of our meeting.
Okay.
Right. I don't have a time frame, but please hang out if you're available. We'd love to hear from you.
I will do my best. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. Okay, and so again, we will remain open until 6:45 for community forum. Again, any item not on the agenda. And if somebody pops in or something, you kind of let us know. We're going to go on to the next item, and we will get to you at the earliest possible opportunity. With that, we have no public hearings this evening, but we're going to move on to our first management report, which is our North County Broadband Strategic Plan. And this will be our Community Development Director, Phil Dunsmore, and Deputy Director of Economic and Community Development, Lorelei Cabell. I think your microphone is.
There we go. How's that? Excellent. Thank you all. Great. Very excited to be here this evening to talk about the Broadband Strategic Plan project as directed by the 2021-2023 Council Action Plan. Staff was directed to further enhance the broadband internet infrastructure in Atascadero. It's become increasingly more important as a lot of our people in our community are using the internet for remote work, as you know, online learning. Every child has a Chromebook now for school to do their homework on, telehealth, doctor's appointments, and all of those great things, virtual meetings. So the goal really is to work towards a widespread deployment of broadband and that give users, all of our users in the community, higher speeds, more reliable internet, and more affordable internet too. That's going to be very important for equitable access across all of our residents. So we kicked off the broadband strategic plan in October, and it was about a 6-month process. We wrapped late last month, and here we are to talk about the final plan. We'll have Teleworks Maria Kelly here to present some of the key findings from the project. We finalized the plan in late March, and here we are this evening. Real quick background. We really wanted to bring to this project a regional approach. This is not just our problem in Atascadero, it's our entire county's problem. We're a rural county, and we share a job shed and a housing shed with Paso Robles, our neighbors, and the county in unincorporated areas around us. So we took this as a regional lens with our friends in Paso Robles, as well as our friends in Templeton, and we're working collaboratively with the county through their process. We were awarded a LATA grant, a local area technical assistance grant, about 1 month after we got started on the project, thanks to our collaboration with Paso Robles. And so this project cost has been covered by the state of California. This was a very smooth, expeditious process. Have managed many projects and none have gone quite so well with so many stakeholders, including 2 cities co-managing the project. So that was very exciting. It was successful for both us and for Paso Robles. And we had a really great partner in Teleworks who've guided us through the project. So I would say that Maria will get into the details of the plan momentarily, but another couple of important things that you might want to know is, great, so what did this plan do for us and what does this tool actually do? And so we initiated this project specifically to help us understand what staff needed to do to be ready to help internet service providers deploy more quickly. How can we get out of the way and remove some of the roadblocks? We also wanted to know what grants we should be chasing. They're coming down from infrastructure grants from the federal government. We've got a state of California grant. So we wanted to be sure that we were ready to track those and we had the data and information we needed. We needed a policy analysis. What do we need to change to make sure it's legal and easy for us to deploy when an internet service provider comes in? We needed to understand what is the real problem and what are the gaps and how do we close them? So those were all big pieces of this project. And of course, the engagement was very robust. Stakeholders, internet service providers, the general public, including the unserved and the underserved, which are very hard to reach when you're asking them to do a broadband survey. So there was a lot of technical support from the Broadband Consortium and Maria Kelly, who was representing Teleworks. And finally, this document is actually something that's going to provide us as staff a very high level document that says, here's what you need to do next. And those can be very useful or very unuseful. And that's why some plans sit on shelves at the end of the day. But I feel as a staff member moving forward very supported by this plan, and there are very clear steps for me to follow. So I feel that the city of Atascadero now has a really great tool, not only to apply for grants now, because we know where our gaps are and what we're trying to do, but also to know when those grants are coming down the pipeline. And a lot of the documents that we need to fill out for grant applications have been done as part of this process. So that's very exciting for me as well. And finally, this is the mechanism, a strategic plan is the mechanism for applying for some of that funding. Without this plan that says these are the gaps and this is what we're trying to do, we can't actually apply for those. So this is, again, another really important tool. Really, next steps, we could talk about those in a moment, but I feel very clear that we have a upcoming grant deadline coming up in June. We are engaging with internet service providers right now in real time. We do not have final proposals, but we will be working with them and collaborating over the next couple months as soon as this plan is approved and moving forward, and be taking those implementation action items in our plan and moving forward with policy updates. And you'll see all sorts of things coming from us in the future. We've continued to work with Teleworks since the finalization of this plan, and they are still engaging with internet service providers on behalf of the city, because it's really nice as a staff member to have your people talk to their people who talk internet and help us through the legality of making those things happen. So I will be coming back to you next month for a kind of an ad services for the Teleworks team, and just wanted to give you a heads up on that so we can keep the momentum and the engagement going. And you can ask me any questions. Otherwise, we can turn it over to Maria Kelly to present on the strategic plan. Without any questions?
Let's go ahead and go with you, Maria, and then we'll ask all our questions at once.
Absolutely. Sounds great. Hello, Council. Maria Kelly, Atascadero resident, subcontracting with Teleworks. I want to share with you that the last time I was here, I was bookended by Christmas activities. So it's really fun to now be here and have all the next fun activities. So again, thanks, Lorelei. So I do have a PowerPoint presentation to cover a little bit more about the project scope, where we how we covered it, timeline, key findings. What did the data tell us? It's always really helpful to understand what the data is telling us and what's driving the project. So you can actually jump to the third slide. So the initial project scope was really just looking at, the basic alignment of broadband for all, access, affordability, just those basic pieces, realizing also that Atascadero and Paso Robles really have an economic development interest. And when we're talking about that, we're talking about a much more robust infrastructure. And through those conversations and some of the initial data finding, we augmented the scope and did a light touch RFI with the ISP community to with the data that we had to really then look at to gigabit service. Because what we're talking about is when we're talking about these large infrastructure futures, we're really not talking, we're looking at the minimum speeds of what the government is telling us we want to look at, 120, 100 download, 20 upload, but the future is gigabit. And when we're talking about smart city planning and true redundancy and resiliency with safety, you're talking about gigabit service. So we did veer away a little bit to get a little more information on how that might line up. So that was fun. And I'll be reporting some of those findings. I'm just going to keep going, Lorelei. Okay. So project overview. Slide 4, just to give you, just to remind you a little bit about how fast this process was and what we did when, where, and the stakeholder in broadband planning. For effective broadband planning, you have to have robust stakeholder engagement because you're touching so many sectors that people don't even realize. That means interviews with the school districts and superintendents and IT and community-based organizations and all these organizations. Really, if you go back one slide, Lorelei. I'm on the project overview. So again, just to sort of share with you how the process worked and what works well when you're talking about broadband planning. This is what we did. The meetings, the data collection, the analysis development. Sometimes those were crossing over between the data collection, analysis development went all the way up to the end. And then here we are today with some of the project deliverables where I'll share with you some of those key findings. Next slide, please. So a little deeper dive into that timeline just to really show you how fast it was. I really would like to compliment North County and SLO County, but North County in particular, and their robust engagement on the data collection, the speed testing and the needs assessment that we were able to gather really helped build the case. And this is the case as Lorelei referenced. This is the data and the information that you're going to be able to use to go to CPUC or the federal funding account and say, we really do have unserved and underserved when we're just looking at those minimum speeds. But when we're looking at economic development and future build out, we're an area of need and specifically around competition. That's what's going to help drive this. So next slide, please. So again, as I mentioned, California Broadband for All is targeting 100% connectivity with access to affordable broadband. Training and equipment and devices, which is the digital equity and inclusion piece. So all of this was taken into consideration. All of this was thought through as the plan was developed, and some of these key recommendations have been made, looking at who are our partners, who may be future partners, and just making sure that this project is aligned with the state, the way the state lens is using it, because that also lines up with the Fed. So you do have really good information in your hands. So I'm going to start in now on the key findings. Another piece that as we were going into this project and getting started, go ahead to the next slide. Okay, I think this will work. As we were going into this project, the FCC broadband map, which is what is determining what funds are getting allocated to what states, there was a FCC challenge process open. As part of this project, we had enough data to go ahead and submit a challenge on behalf of the cities. The telework staff did do that. It's helpful because it helps with the accuracy now and in the future, because this is not a one and done process. This is an ongoing process. Thanks. Perfect. So we were able to use the data that we collected to supply a challenge to the FCC mapping, which was great. What we saw with the FCC, and you're going to see a little bit of data differentiation throughout some of the various places we did collect data. The FCC said we only had 1.3% unserved household and 60%, unserved, and only 60 or 0.5% underserved. As comparison, when you look at the slide at this picture right next to it, the CPUC said we had 470 unserved households. We can work with that and figure out where we need to get. So certain funding will allow us to reach certain number of those households, but this was really important and helpful for us to know during our analysis process. And I'm happy to answer any questions on that right now, or if you want me to hold and wait till the end. I think we're good. Wait until you're
Okay.
finished. Yeah. All right. So key finding around with the speed test data, what we found out of the 320, you can read 326 speed tests, we were able to identify 17% of those that participated were unserved and 72% were underserved and only 11% were served based on census blocks. We would have liked to have seen more census blocks participating, but 33% of your census participation is actually pretty great. So that was fine. We did well. On the infrastructure, looking at when we really were starting to look at what are your assets, what are we looking to connect? Want to give great kudos to the staff for their engagement and participation. Anchor institution connectivity is a significant piece of the planning process. While we may start with 7, there are over 58 anchor institutions within this community. Starting with the city infrastructure and getting that all connected is now you have that information and that you need to start making some of those plans and figure out how you want to do that. We were able to assess the middle mile fiber potential, what we do know is there, or where there's future potential opportunities in regards to accessing middle mile fiber, which is going to be important for this final mile, for the sort of the last mile planning. This project really is about last mile planning. We weren't really looking at the much extension of middle mile infrastructure within, but we were looking at last mile, but we can see where there could be some enhancements in that middle mile to support last mile. And we looked at all the other additional assets. We've just highlighted some here. We found some abandoned sewer lines that could possibly be used for broadband. So that was helpful. In regards to broadband readiness, and this is what Lorelei was referencing, we did do an analysis of some of the, again, let me back up a little bit. The California Department of Technology, who is leading all the robust broadband planning really for the state of California, put out a playbook. We took that playbook and we refined it a little bit and asked some key questions and worked really closely with staff to identify and highlight some of the areas that are really important for your consideration as policymakers and for staff to figure out where we can tighten up to make sure that lower those barriers to deployment. That is the goal. That is the goal of the local agency technical assistance grants. So we totally lined that up. And these are the areas where you have opportunities to increase some of the policies and procedures to support broadband planning. So you can see that there's some, and again, it's initially the heavy lift is the identification, and the future next steps are not quite as heavy. It just takes a little bit more time, but we'll get there. So it's really great work by staff and really appreciated their input. So you can see some of the high level recommendations that are spelled out more clearly in the plan, but these are some of the areas where the city can continue to work. As I mentioned, okay, I reversed mine. I'm sorry. So some of the key findings around digital inclusion, this has to do with not only access to the internet, but affordability, but one of the affordability, but one of the issues is making sure that our residents not only have access to the internet, but the devices and the training to know how to use it. This was another area where we saw some discrepancy between census data and the CPUC data saying who has access and who doesn't. So you can see on that left side, 9.6% of the households don't have internet access based on census data. If you can remember, based on the speed test data, that number was much lower. Atascadero overall is fairly well resourced, although when you speak to school districts or community-based organizations, we have some really great opportunities to connect people with devices and training. So there are some really good training opportunities or an opportunity to implement training programs. That's not going to totally be on you. That is a partnership. It's a regional partnership and does not require just the city to lift, but more to be aware and help communicate. Always encourage cities to establish a broadband web page or some sort of interface to help communicate when these opportunities come up. So 90% of the households do have access. That pretty much lined up with a lot of what we found in the data and with the needs assessment. So my apologies, but this is not the right presentation. Okay. There's a couple key pieces I don't want to miss. It's the one I sent Friday. Okay. We're good. We'll get there. I can give you a little preliminary. So I'll wait just a minute and make sure we're where we are.
While you're waiting,
Yeah.
what was that far out magenta dot that was far out on the west side as like a key institution? We were sitting here.
The
wondering what
magenta
that-
dot on the far
Yeah,
outside.
that little magenta dot right there. What
you
is that?
Either have some sort of, Luke might be able to answer that.
That's our repeater site.
There
would be
you go.
my guess.
That's what we were
Perfect.
thinking.
Yeah,
some
the
sort of
dots are always
transportation.
fun to decipher, right? But they're
Just
helpful.
just a curiosity.
No,
Okay, thank you.
it's a great question. I like that one. Okay, are we? Okay. I'll just jump into the ISP engagement. We can go. So as we mentioned, part of the scope did shift a little bit as we wanted to find out a little bit more from the ISPs, and we did. You'll find in the report, we after some research and some different offerings, we can identify that we know we've got satellite, we have wireless, we have fiber. We reached out to 11 ISPs, not just ISPs that were operating in the area, but we did also reach out to some other ones outside the area. If you recall, about a year and a half ago, Google Fiber was here sort of exploring our area and our county. We did a similar outreach to some other similar companies. What we ended up doing, we ended up meeting with 9 ISPs, mostly local, but some outside the area. And when we sent out the sort of the request for information, request for proposal, we did engage with 4 of them, and you can see who they are here. It was a really wonderful process, and it is a process that actually is helping accelerate and expedite some of these future conversations, because we were able to gather some data and information in regards that we really were able to see where the infrastructure, where current ISPs have infrastructure and where those gaps are, or where the competition needs to be sort of slide in. So we switched to an ISP-centered approach, worked with the city, met with their city staff a couple more times, met with the ISPs, and really did ask for some concept proposals based on the 1 gigabit symmetrical, that fiber, who do we need to reach and how are we going to reach them? And you can see what those results are there. And again, once you dive into the report, you'll see a little bit more about that entire process. It was a great process. It's an important process. And it is probably going to be potentially ongoing, but it is something that the public sector does. It's exactly what we talked about when I presented earlier, the future of broadband deployment, our public-private partnerships. That is the way the funding is coming down. It requires the public sector to participate. So you've done exactly what you needed to do. So I jumped ahead. So in that other slide were these key findings. So I presented these key findings initially, but this slide I didn't get to. So of those surveyed in the needs assessment with internet access, while Atascadero is very well connected, 35% that are connected find their service to be unreliable or very unreliable. That is significant. When we're talking about a future of the digital age and e-commerce and banking and all the things, telehealth, everything that we do digitally, we need reliable and redundant services. And 73% say it's too expensive, which is not a surprise considering broadband services have continued to, or internet services have continued to increase over time. And while some quality has also increased, we're kind of locked in, and it's very difficult for some households making that choice between what services are they going to deem basic, which is why we're seeing internet and broadband services moving towards the 4th utility. Again, why the public sector is participating. In regards to the Affordable Connectivity Program, working with households here, and identifying those numbers, we can see now through the analysis where those opportunities are to, again, hopefully alleviate some of those expenses and concerns. 90% have basic skills, although many say they lack skills. In the public forum that we had, that population, and I think it's captured in the report as well, we find tend to be second language, English as a second language, and over 55. Because that's what they're qualifying. Some places qualify seniors 65, some people say 55. So we just have to go with it. That's what that data says. So here's a nice diagram of the recommendations, and I'll cover them a little bit more clearly in the next couple of slides, but we broke it out by infrastructure, inclusion, and some policies and management. And so you saw those as I was going through the slides. Looking for concept, as Lorelei mentioned, potentially having a conversation or future action on concept proposal. And then the CASF infrastructure grant, again, that public-private partnership and focusing on 1 gig deployment. So that's the infrastructure highlights. And I think that that's really important to keep in mind as we move forward. So what are we talking about in regards to timeline of implementation? Here is a potential approach or suggested approach in regards to what we saw as timeline. Obviously the CASF application is significant. This June 1 is the first break off. It is a rotating. It's not a one and done, it's an ongoing. But getting in earlier rather than later would be great, because more demand, increased demand on these funds is going to only happen as other cities and agencies also continue to plan. So looking out through the end of next year, you can see, and for those of you who aren't familiar, the BEAD monitoring, that is the funding that's coming from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act through the NTIA. It is infrastructure and digital equity funding. So I was on a call today. That is a big thing to target. And I have some updates that I'll share with Lorelei next week on what that's going to require. Next slide is, okay, so policies and managing, like I said, management, you know what your next steps is, staff knows what your next steps and what those policy and processes needs to be updated and how long we think it's going to take you. Policy updates could be completed by the end of this next year, which would be great. But ongoing monitoring and challenging FCC data and CPUC data is going to be important to make sure that we are getting our fair share, or at least getting what we can as the work moves forward. And in regards to digital inclusion, again, this is more of a regional digital equity planning really should be done regionally. It is regionally. Of course, there's local components to it. And so working with local entities to have this, the most important thing that the city can do is support ACP enrollment. And that can be done either via website or word of mouth. But one of the programs that your library through the county library system has, it's one of the best online learning, self-taught, self-driven. The only issue is that it's not in multi-language yet. So there would need to be another multi-language component, but this North Star online learning program is absolutely fantastic and it doesn't cost anything. We don't have a lot of other digital training programs in our community. You can go to Westa or you could go somewhere, but those programs are more around Excel and Microsoft Word. It's more really geared towards job versus the basic. When I was in ACP enrollment this last weekend, we're really talking about helping certain people sign up with an email and do simple navigation of the internet. And there are certain community members in our county and locally in our population where resources really are only accessible via the internet, sometimes CalFresh or certain housing applications, job applications. Even in my conversations with ECHO, figuring out a way to make sure that certain residents have a computer and a device and then learning how to use it as they become independent, it is becoming a key tool to independence. So just being aware of that as we move forward. And that is the presentation. And happy to answer any questions. I also have a member of the Teleworks team on standby with us if there's any technical questions that I'm not able to answer this evening.
Thank you, Maria. Lorelei, is there anything else on your behalf?
No, I just want to thank Maria for rolling with the punches as we switched up her entire PowerPoint. So thank you.
It was perfect.
That was very well stated and way to roll with it.
Well
So thank
done.
you.
Well
Yeah, let me
done.
know if you have any questions for staff or Teleworks.
Sure thing. So what I want to find out from you tonight, Lorelei, we're looking at this strategic plan And first of all, I want to say, thank you to you and everyone that you worked with, because I know it wasn't just you, although you did lead the charge. There were many that supported you in this process. And it's something that, as a council a couple of years ago, we said, this is a priority. It's one of the reasons we ended up hiring you, which has been fantastic. And one of the things that happened is you kind of have reach saying, hey, we're going to do something, but maybe that's in a few years, and everybody's talking about it, but nobody's doing anything. And then Mayor Martin and I are talking together and saying, well, what if we just do something? And we talk with the city managers, and Maria Kelly gets involved, and let's move forward. So I'm so glad that we did, because here's this wonderful strategic plan that allows us to start doing these things. And it's all because the five of us were willing to say, yes, we're moving forward. Same with Paso, and then the work that you've put in. So thank you so much for that. So what you're looking for from us tonight is more just, we're adopting this. We're saying, yes, we're accepting this, we're adopting this, but we're not saying, okay, go do micro trenching. You're going to come back with policies later that are tailored to Atascadero.
That is exactly correct. Yeah.
Okay.
We would be, if it recommends micro trenching in here, we would actually be sitting down with Public Works and saying, how is that possible? Where can we be doing that? What projects could qualify to make that happen? Is it resurfacing, or does it have to be below a 6-inch, depth? And then we would come to you and say, we'd like to be more broadband ready. And here's a couple things that have been identified that we think will work for our city. So really, this tool is just a larger overlay of things that we need to be doing, or can be doing, and can consider doing within our framework to be applicable to some, or be able to apply for some of the funding, and that are best practices that have been recommended by our consultant team.
Yeah. So I wanted to be clear, we're not looking for direction tonight. Some of us might be asking questions. We've already asked some questions of you and Rochelle. So we have a lot of, we've had a lot of those answered. So we're not getting into nitty gritty details, but we may have some high level questions we want to ask. But beyond that, you're not looking for anything from us.
Correct.
All right, great. With that, I will look to, I'm just going to kind of go to my squares here and I see Mayor Pro Tem Funk with her hand raised.
Thank you. And I want to thank, echo the mayor's remarks, and thank Maria and Lorelei and the whole team that worked on this, because it is exciting to see us have a clearer plan for how we need to move forward. Could you go back to the slide that has the maps, and the map particular of the areas that have no service at all? That it's very early in the presentation. That one.
This is
Keep
the
going.
PUC map.
I think you're looking for the one that had both the PUC
Yeah.
and the FCC.
So that was in the other presentation.
Oh, okay. Well, we can
broke
work
it
with this
apart.
one. If you can,
So
the
this-
next one.
Yeah, the CPUC, the CPUC data is going to be a little bit more applicable in regards to any funding requests or grant applications, and as far as service areas. So,
Yeah, okay. I can work with this one.
Good.
So what we see here in the pink areas on the map are the ones that are really unserved. And it's clear, if you overlaid this on a map of topographical map of Atascadero, that a lot of our areas have challenges with hills.
Yep. So,
and then we have a pocket of it that's more central. Could you talk about a couple of the areas that are the extreme west side with lots of hills, the center of town, and the areas over by the city yard in that hilly area?
On the
About
east
what
side?
some of the physical challenges are that we might be facing
Sure.
in getting those types of areas connected.
So one of the unique things, again, when we looked at the asset inventory, ideally, so we are talking about ideally fiber. That is the framework for gigabit symmetrical speeds is fiber. Preferably it's buried, which is why California passed a law requiring municipalities to examine their policies around microtrenching and dig once. There is a fairly robust pole infrastructure in the city of Atascadero, which can be utilized for some of the deployment. So some of these areas where we see it's red, we didn't deep dive into the analysis as to whether that would be buried fiber or pole attached fiber. That would really be up to the ISP deploying it and the costs associated with that. Best case, best practice is you bury it, If you can't bury it, you're going to put it on a pole as a pole attachment, and that's totally feasible. So that's what you're seeing. That's the hilly area on the west side. Now, that being said, there may be areas upon further analysis that would require some sort of potentially point-to-point wireless or some sort of other infrastructure. And some of that is already out there. It just would need to be enhanced. So I'm not going to speak too much to that technology, but topography is an issue for sure. On that, and on the east side, I'm not entirely sure. That may be another service provider area who's just not providing or it's a state hospital. There are some areas around there that are not providing services at that 25/3 speed.
Okay. Thank you. That at least the bottom line is that there is hope on the horizon
Yes.
for folks who find themselves out there, and the city is able to have a repeater station out there. So that would be an asset that we maybe can take advantage of too in the
Potentially.
far west side and in some of the other areas.
Yep.
Okay. Do we face really big barriers or only modest barriers in competing for grants for this work?
That is such a difficult question to answer because it really depends on who applies when. With the local agency technical assistance grants, it was just serendipitous that it really worked out well that this project was starting while there was still a pot of money. That pot of money has now been oversubscribed. And there's only, I want to say, less than 100 projects throughout the state of California that access those funds, $50 million. Also, please keep in mind that a lot of this is being funded through SB 156, which while we have this was the initial funding year, the planning for that is for it to be the pot to be refilled, so to speak, depending on budgeting and those types of things. So again, that's something to watch as broadband planning moves on, is where are those funding opportunities going to continue. So these are SB 156 funds that we've been talking about right now.
Great. Thank you very much.
Now that with the time change and the days longer, we got the sun coming in and you can't see Councilmember Daras. We're pulling blinds and all right,
Yeah,
he's
tap his
here.
head,
He's
that's
here. Never fair. All right, other council questions, just looking to the scores here. Councilmember Newsom.
Lorelai, you were talking about bringing it back to council again with this lengthy process. It looks like it's going to spread over a few years. How many more times this year do you think we'll be looking at this again as you're progressing through?
That's a good question. I think what we would do is bring all policy recommendations together as appropriate, but I think we'll work with Public Works and hopefully remove some of the obstacles that have been kind of posed as challenges or things that are not broadband friendly this year, possibly before the end of the year. That's the goal. In the meantime, that doesn't mean we have to slow down this process. As soon as we accept this project and document into our city, we can actually begin with the implementation of all of the other pieces too, including engagement of ISPs. And we're in conversations now. Those don't just stop magically. It's just a matter of, what does that look like? And that is a really positive conversation that we're having with multiple ISPs. So it's very exciting.
Okay. So you said we'll see it again sometime in May or June.
Yeah, I think we can bring some policies together all at once. I would say within the next, before the end of the year.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Warbo.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, those kind of were my two questions, but I want to make sure I understand something. On Councilmember Newsom's question, though, if you're going to come back in May or June, that's like right around the corner. But I was just wondering, I mean, if implementing a policy would help move something along, then we wouldn't want to wait a year, I assume, to, come back and do all of them at once.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And then back on Councilmember Funk's question, because I had the same question and that other map with the really bright red and bright green really showed it better, but this shows it well enough that mysteriously, if you're in front of Vaughn's, you apparently can't get high-speed internet. It kind of boggles the mind that the downtown core has a big pink blot on it. When, according to this we have people way out in the far end of Las Encinas that can have access to high-speed internet?
Potentially.
Mm.
I mean, again, when we're talking high-speed internet for our community right now, we are more talking around, 100, 300 download, depending on what you're paying. If you're paying less, you're not getting those speeds. It is throttled back. But there aren't a lot of people or businesses in this community that are anywhere near any gig speed.
And when we say unserved, is that unserved? It could be by choice. I don't want it, or is this unserved in terms of not available to me at that location?
Unserved infrastructure, unserved.
Not
so-
available.
So the unserved is 25. Now the terminology for unserved is anyone receiving service at 25 download, 3 upload, which is not considered really, that's dial up almost. Not, I don't really know, but that's considered unserved. So there are a lot of places that may be able to access something, but this is truly where service is not available.
Well, and speaking of dial-up, those of us who are old enough to remember using it, the standard constantly changes.
Right.
30 years ago, we might have been talking about, hey, let's get a modem for everybody.
It was, and it was
Modem
10-1.
accessibility, right?
It's all right.
Yeah, that's right. To replace our carrier pigeons.
Yep.
So, and so this standard here 10 years from now might seem very antiquated, but is the plan, I assume, flexible
Great
enough that, let's say we allow and actually encourage or potentially even subsidize micro trenching, that whatever we plan and build would be capable of upgrade?
That's such a great question. I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's exactly what the conversation is around. The technology for years has been changing, copper, DSL, fiber. Fiber is the fat, maybe it'll change, but we'll have everything in place. We'll be able to replace it, right? Ideally. Fiber is the fastest. And when you plan out to 1 gig, some communities are planning out to 10 gig. But once you have that infrastructure, then you're talking about adding strands versus major infrastructure, right? And the importance of fiber for redundancy and resiliency is also like cybersecurity, also, any smart city planning policies and implementation. As you start to move towards more smart city type of infrastructure, you need this fiber infrastructure to support that. So that is why the state and the feds are saying we just need to jump ahead and really make some robust investments in this now and plan for the future. Some people, there are, like I said, there are communities already that they're not even stopping at 1 gig. They're just going straight up to 10 plus.
The mayor had mentioned that when we had this, first talked about this a few years ago, one of our considerations was that we wanted to be able to track businesses, the kind of businesses that in turn, though, required the availability of high-speed internet. And this report, as I read it, as much as, we all want our Netflix and all of that sort of thing, and a lot of people do need to work from home and need high-speed internet. It seemed focused on the personal, on the household, that sort of thing, as opposed to the business, let's say, our business corridor, if you will, on El Camino and Morrill Road and downtown. It was a pretty lengthy document, so I didn't read every page, but is there any focus in there on how we get that kind of access as quickly as possible so that we can attract those kinds of businesses that need that kind of connectivity?
I think I understand your question. So I'm going to break it up into a couple little parts. So when we're talking about some of the CPUC CASIF funding, we're talking about unserved, underserved residential households. So that is a component of it. The city of Atascadero and Paso Robles initially looked at broadband planning for that economic development aspect of it as well, that may not actually qualify for some of those CASIF fundings. Once you start putting in infrastructure, it's going to expand. Like once you start at baseline, that's going to be what is expected. I hope that kind of is making sense. But we're talking about a phased approach
you need to reach some of the funding, you need to reach the unserved, underserved first. But while you're installing that infrastructure, typically a provider would offer that opportunity for a business as well to connect. So this is not mutually exclusive. As this infrastructure is deployed, there will be the opportunities for the businesses to connect. And there is some economic analysis in there as to the benefits of that and why it is an incentive for the city to continue to look at that through the planning, making sure that there is, whatever ISP provider you partnership, maybe part of the requirement of deployment is putting fiber down that core.
Well, that's why I wonder, I mean, clearly the federal government and the state government want to subsidize the household access. And I understand that you wouldn't expect that somebody's going to subsidize a business access, but how do we promote that business access? Or like perhaps you just said, ask the ISP provider, say, hey, as part of your plan, we want to know how you're going to support our core, our business corridors.
Yep. That's
so that we can
yes.
attract those kind of businesses for economic development.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And in the report, you gave some examples of public-private partnerships. I don't know if that's being visualized for here or more in terms of what kind of not so much owning anything, but what kind of incentives can we provide?
It's a little bit of both because incentives are part of a public-private partnership. I mean, you're using your public dollars potentially, depending if it's ARPA funding or CASA funding, when you're using it and you're partnering with an ISP even if it's as an incentive, that is a public-private partnership. It may not be that you're owning the infrastructure, but you are incentivizing a certain aspect of it to ensure deployment.
Right. Like we could do things to make microtrenching easier.
Correct.
Waive encroachment permits or something like that. There's things we could do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Great questions. Thank you.
Councilmember Daris?
Most of my questions were already answered, but I just wanted to kind of touch on, I was also curious about downtown being unserved, which seemed kind of peculiar that it's right there, that thing would be there, but your answer makes sense. And also the technology changes that, go on, some things are obsolete 6 months after they come out. So planning ahead for changes down the road, fiber is the gold standard now, and what happens 10 years down the road to be able to expand on that or to increase the capabilities. You've seen that you guys are planning on that. I think is a great idea. So I want to say great job.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And fiber really is, as far as, maybe there will be the next great thing, but for redundancy, resiliency, fiber is the fastest connector. And, they just keep getting faster. So again, these tiny little strands with data sets that are, I'm going to say there's also that little spot on Traffic Way on the other map, and I'm very familiar with that little spot. That's pink. I moved to this one so you could see what the speed testing data showed us as well and how it correlated with some of those areas.
One question that I had is that you showed it on one of the sort of the timeline, but it's also here in the broadband strategy and action plan. It says non-incumbent negotiations agreements in that non-incumbent track. It says it's contingent upon the failure of negotiation with an incumbent ISP. And that would start like in the first half of 2024. And that seems like an awfully long time to get going. And I'm wondering, Lorelei or Maria, could you tell me, I'm hoping we can be much quicker if, we're not necessarily relying on an incumbent. We can sort of do a competition type thing and see what actually ends up working best for the community.
That's absolutely possible. Just by completing this project, Google Fiber could come back to the table and say, I know we told you needed more people, but now that you're applying for this CASIP grant, if we were to match your $5 million award, assuming we are successful, then we would commit $5 million of our own, and we would light up all of these areas that you've identified, number one, as a priority of unserved and underserved. And then we can head out to, some of the more topographically challenged areas. So that's exactly one way to do it. So.
Okay. So we're not waiting, until 2024 to start those types of negotiations.
Nope.
Okay.
We'd like to see it in the ground by then.
Well, I think that to draw it's a great point. When you look at the discussion with incumbents, so incumbent providers are people already in the area. Remember that we met with 11 or talked to 11, met with 9. The incumbents were the one that were most responsive. So you work your way through that process with them first. If that doesn't pan out, then you start those discussions immediately with the non-incumbent ISPs, get them up to speed. But to Lorelai's point, yeah, it's nothing is stopping with this currently. I'm curious, just the definition of non-incumbent is Charter Spectrum considered the only incumbent, or are Ranch Wi-Fi, Astound, and AT&T also considered incumbent because they are in this area? The only incumbents that really are considered large carrier incumbent providers are Charter Spectrum and AT&T. Okay. All right. Thank you. Yeah. All right. I think I'd like to go ahead and go out to public comment to then see if there's any members of the public wishing to speak on this item. So if you'd like to speak on this item of the broadband strategic plan, if you're on Zoom, go ahead and raise your hand. You go to the bottom of the screen and hit that little raise hand icon. Or I don't think we have anyone on the phone, correct, Luke? Okay. I'm not seeing any hands, so I'm going to give it just another moment. If you were waiting to see if anyone else was going to speak, this is your time on broadband. All right, I'm not seeing any. I'm going to go ahead and close public comment and bring it back to council for, I'm assuming, a motion, unless there's some sort of deliberation that needs to take place.
I'll move that the council adopt the North County Broadband Strategic Plan. I think they did a great job with the presentation and what we see coming forward.
I'll second.
A motion by Council Member Daris, a second by Mayor Pro Tem Funk. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Daris,
Yes.
Councilmember Warbo,
Yes.
Councilmember Newsom,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Funk,
Yes.
Mayor Moreno.
Yes, ma'am.
Motion passes.
Thank you. And again, thank you, Maria, for being here and for all your work on this project, and to you too, Lorelai. Moving to our second management report, we've got our affordable housing incentives phase 1, and this will be our community development director, Mr. Phil Dunsmore.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. I'm going to bring to you tonight one of the implementing features from our housing element. Let me just bring up a little presentation. I'm going to share a few facts and figures with you. Can't believe it's been over a year since we've talked about affordable housing incentives. Our last big discussion on this was about affordable housing fees and inclusionary housing ordinance. Well, this is a little different tonight. That was a really big task to bite off. So now we're looking at something that's the carrot, not the stick. We're looking at an incentive. And that's a good way to start out because it really gives us some leverage on affordable housing projects. So right now, what we're asking council of is to allow us to develop and bring back a policy that's going to allow for a fee deferment for qualifying residential projects that fit the affordable categories. And now it allow us to defer their development impact fees. Additionally, we've already got people on the line that are waiting for this kind of authorization and they're applying for grant funds and they need that commitment from the city. So we're saying, asking council tonight, can you give us that permission to prepare a letter to say, we can commit, we can develop something, we can have a program adopted, in the next month or two. One of the programs, and we've got quite a few in our housing element that we put together to build an affordable housing program. And one of them speaks to what we're asking tonight. And that's this impact fee deferral, not a waiver, but instead long-term low interest loan that basically allows deferment of those development impact fees, allows them to be either paid at a later date or paid over time based on how we set up that policy. But this program 2E from our housing element says provide when possible developer incentives such as expedited permit processing, which we do, and developer impact fee deferrals for units that are affordable to lower income households. Why are we doing this now? Because we're getting requests for those deferments. We don't have a current policy on this, and it really truly implements that program, which is a key thing. We want to be able to tell HCD, hey, we're doing all we can to support these projects. What does this program look like? It's a long-term low interest loan, essentially, that defers a payment of development impact fees and wastewater capacity charges. That's the recommendation. It's roughly about $18,000 per unit is what these cost. It goes up and down a little bit based on the size of the unit and based on the number of fixtures they have in the unit, changes their wastewater fee as well. We can set the terms. There's no definitive way that we have to do these terms. A lot of our local cities that surround us do these. They all have different terms. Paso Robles uses a 30-year term. San Luis Obispo uses something different. Some communities even do a full waiver, and that gets you into some other areas, and we're not suggesting that. What we do is we do this in exchange for what we call a deed restriction. And that means putting a deed restriction on that property that it has to rent for these affordable qualifying amounts, which the county sets each year. And what we're talking about is low, very low, and extremely low. Not talking about the moderate units, which we do quite well in anyway. We're talking about the units that we have a difficult time getting enough of in Atascadero. Typically, what the state law puts in place for a project that qualifies as affordable to get, for example, a density bonus, they like to see a 55-year deed restriction. For this, we could have an option. We could do even 30 years, but typically 55 is the amount of time. So what would a policy like this look like? We could have a threshold. For example, we could say, we're not going to do every single affordable unit that comes forward in the city, but let's say there's a project that has at least 5 affordable housing units in it. Not 100% of that project would have to be affordable in those categories, but at least 5 units in the project. And just those units in the project would be subject to this deferral. And that would, again, would be those development impact fees and the wastewater capacity charges, which are 2 separate charges. We're not talking about construction plan check fees, which are the over-the-counter fees that we get paid to review the plans, which are a much smaller amount of money. And again, those parameters, we could have them pay each year, starting at 1 year. We could have them pay the whole thing at once at the very end of a specific term. We could have different terms. I think our base recommendation we're starting at is 17 years. We're still in the process of gathering a little data on this. We need some more information from folks like People's Self-Help Housing to say what works for you, what gets you the points, what gets you there, what works for us. Next steps on this, we could return with a draft policy. It does include some amendments to the municipal code in our finance code section. There's some things in there that say that, when development impact fees must be paid. So we would simply have to add some language to say, unless a deferment agreement is approved in conjunction with, the parameters that we set forth. We're also saying one of our next steps is we could draft a letter to People's Self-Help Housing now. They are going after getting tax credit financing and a grant for their Del Rio Ridge project, which we had approved. That project was held up because they didn't get approval. They were just shy of the points needed. This would get them those points. I also understand that recently they got one of the easements they needed on that project at the back of the project, so they can actually get the driveway to work on that. So they've been making progress on that. Now, lastly, too, there is a whole bunch of other programs in our housing element that we still need to implement. We've got time for those. Not a discussion factor tonight, but we'd like to come back. And there's some other items that we need to pick away at. So in the end, we do believe that this would really help us in reaching our RHNA goals in our low and very low categories. And really getting one of our housing element policies or programs adopted. This is a great tool to incentivize affordable housing. It also really helps affordable housing developers. And we have an affordable housing developer asking for this program specifically right now. Nope, goes black. Anyway, that ends my presentation. I'm here to answer your questions and we can talk about some of the details. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Really appreciate you bringing something like this back. It was, you could probably see the heartburn that several of us had in that conversation about some of the other options that were going to cost, people building homes a lot more money. And that was a very difficult conversation and something that not many of us were terribly excited about. And really appreciate you bringing back something like this. That is something that we've all said that we can get behind and that clearly, people self-help and others are needing. So thank you for that. And I think tonight we're not sitting here saying 17-year, 10-year, or 4.5%. We're saying you figure out what people self-help and others need to make sure they qualify. We're just agreeing in concept to bring this back, correct?
That's absolutely correct. Yes,
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. With that, I will see if there are any questions from my council members. I see Councilmember Newsom followed by Mayor Pro Tem Funk.
Thank you, Phil. As we're looking at some of these, you spoke about other cities using the same program. Have any of those other cities have any defaults or any issues with the terms that they entered into?
I have not heard that they have, no. But I haven't asked that specific question, but it hasn't come up in our conversations.
How long have they been participating in these type of deferments? Just a year, or are they further down
Many,
this
many
process?
years, actually. Both Paso Robles and the city of San Luis Obispo are two cities that I've talked to. Interviewed with the Paso Robles Housing Authority that's used this for quite a few years to kickstart some of their projects and get additional grant scoring on their projects. And more recently, I've talked to the city of San Luis Obispo on their deferment program they've had in place for some years. And then there's another, I forget which other city was going to get back to me on their deferment program. So there's other cities out there in our area.
I would be interested in knowing if any had defaults. I'm assuming with the deed restrictions that on the sale upon the property, then we'd be able to recoup any of those fees that have been in deferment that go into default. Is that correct?
That's a good question. I'm not sure about that. I wonder if Rochelle could weigh in on that.
Yeah. That would be my understanding.
Like a
and-
lien holder?
Yes, I believe in
Yes.
the staff report, it says that there's a lien. I'm looking for it because I just read it, but there will be a lien on the property that would cover that.
There would be a covenant recorded on the property, not only for this deferment, but also for the affordable factor. So therefore, in essence, that's a possibility. that we
So
could
the terms
recover.
of that deferment would become payable upon the default and sale of the property.
That's correct. That seems appropriate.
Okay. And then my other question is on this current housing project, how many more projects do we have asking for the same type of deferment of impact fees?
None currently,
This is
but I
the-
think that this, once we have this program established, that there will be others to follow. And I know People's Self-Help Housing is pursuing other projects in our region. And if that's an option, they'll pursue that. And one of the things we could do is we can have, and I didn't bring this up in this policy, but this is something you could give to staff to make a determination on who we award these to, or you could have each one come back to city council, based on the merits. We could establish a set of criteria and you would just leave it with staff, or we could set a criteria and we'd come back to council. So
Then on that, what would be our minimum units? 5 units for a request?
that's our
deferment?
baseline recommendation and that's open for discussion.
Okay. And then the final question I have, staff projects that this will defer approximately 3 million just on this one property for whatever time frame that we agree for a deferment period.
The $3 million is not on this property. It was more taking our arena requirements and assuming 100% of them went into this on the low and very low categories. We don't actually believe that 100% will go into this. It's going to be some number in between, but did want to estimate on the high end.
Okay. And so our estimate is on any deferment, we're expecting 18,000 per unit.
Yes, it can be anywhere from around the 14,000 up to the 18,000 because we do have different impact fees depending on whether you're in the, high density, medium density, what type of units for capacity charges. So there is some variation for each one. For that cost, you are getting a low or very low income unit. And so if it does qualify, so staff has been looking at this more along the lines of, okay, even if they do default, we got a unit for that price. But if default's a big thing, we can spend a lot more time with the attorney. I do think it will be a lien. Most of these to qualify are going to be agencies like People's Self-Help Housing, a nonprofit that specializes in loaning or trying to go after those tax credit programs. And so they're going to be bigger outfits. You could also consider, hey, we only want to do those programs that are trying to compete for that funding and that this helps them get that funding. So we're just kind of looking for some general feedback tonight on those things that you're concerned about or really want to see, so that we can craft a policy that makes sense in getting the units that we do want here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I know that our existing self-help project is very successful. What I do look at as we're sitting through finance and budget going, oh, 17 to 30 years, how many deferments we're going to have out there and how much money is that? So sorry to critique you, but
And-
thank you for your
And that
time.
was the part of the intent of not doing it for every single unit, kind of have 5. You want to have enough units that you're not trying to track each one, or have an individual homeowner be surprised at year 17 when they have to come up with a lot of money. You want to make sure it's those qualified affordable housing developers that are in this program.
I appreciate it. Staff time on this. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Funk.
Thank you. And I want to thank the staff for bringing this forward. Let's recall for a moment back to a couple of sessions ago when you brought us a report on how we're doing on our RHNA numbers, our Regional Housing Needs Assessment performance. And if I recall correctly, if once we incorporated the projects that are currently in the pipeline, and thinking about this would get us about halfway through the RHNA cycle, that we were at something like 78% or 80-some% of what you would expect over the entire cycle, and we're only halfway there. So that's in every category except the very extremely low. So if you can call back to that category, how many units is it that the state says our population will need in this cycle in the very low, extremely low, and how many units are built or in the pipeline so far?
It's pretty amazing what we have in a pipeline. That's what I'll tell you. It's fantastic if they get built. I mean, with Cal Manor, with it now actually is moving forward, and it's got, get the number, I'll have to write that down. I think it's 50 odd units.
77, yeah.
And then this particular project, Del Rio Ridge. And then if the other project that's coming forward now on the state hospital property, which will have about 70 units in it, and those will be in very low categories. That wasn't even on the chart in terms of our pipeline projects. And there's a few others sprinkled here and there. We're going to get there in this RHNA cycle. I can tell you that it's looking pretty good unless something stops, unless the tap turns off. But I forget what those actual numbers are. I'm sorry, in the very low, extremely low. I don't have that chart available to me.
Sure.
But we're making great progress.
There was, in that very lowest category, there was something over 200 units that the state was saying that we're going to need in that lowest category. And we currently had 4.
You're talking about the extremely low.
Extremely low,
That
very
one's
low.
really hard to
It's a
get.
really tough group.
Yeah.
So part of the reason I'm asking that is since we're in good shape in in some of the other categories, and we're really hurting in that lowest group, and that lowest group is are the people that are hardest to get placed out of ECHO and back, and to keep them housed, they need to be in environments where there are supports for them, because there are reasons that people have very, very low income at all. They're struggling for some very specific kinds of reasons. The SSI checks is all they can get or whatever. And those are folks that need a lot more help and support, and really low income. So I'm wondering if it could be possible in this policy for us to consider having a requirement that a portion of the units, maybe 10% or 20%, of the units that we are subsidizing through this impact fee referral be in that lowest category, so that we can get the people out of the creek beds that we need to get back into housing.
Any of these things are options. We can certainly do that if that's what the council would like to do. We just don't want to box ourselves in too much to where if we put too many requirements on it, then we don't get the bigger projects included that we really want as well. So we've got to provide also some flexibility, but certainly that is an option.
It's certainly something to consider, or to make the deal substantially sweeter if you have those most difficult.
And what
to
we're seeing is a lot of these
units.
projects are coming forward to those unit counts anyway, because that's what gets them the credits and the points as they go forward with their grant and their tax credit applications. They need to have those mixes anyway. And that's what the state wants. So I think we're seeing that, for example, in some of the latest projects that we haven't even gotten the pipeline yet. For example, the state hospital property.
Good. Yeah, I know that Del Rio Ridge property does have those low, extremely low, and it's got some veterans units and got other units that are will help needed populations. Additionally, would this become eligible for projects that have already received their tax credit financing approval? Or would this just be for projects that need this extra support to get over the finish line and get that tax credit financing?
The intent of this program isn't just for projects that go after tax credit financing. We could make it that, but the intent, I think, from staff's perspective is that this is a program simply to implement that housing element policy, simply to incentivize these lower end affordable housing units, whether or not they're applying for the tax credit programs. But we could make that a caveat and a timing of that a caveat, but it certainly wasn't the underlying factor. So it could go either way. And again, we have the authority to put in whatever directives we'd like to in this policy to either broaden or narrow the category.
Sure. When it comes back, I'd love to see some thought to that particular question, because the bigger these kinds of really low, the extremely low and the low tend to be in bigger projects that heavily rely on the tax credit financing as the mechanism. And so, and our projects in this county have had trouble getting over the finish line because of the need for substantial local contributions in the neighborhood of $40,000 a unit total benefits. We just don't have that much community development block grant money or other sources to do that anywhere in the county. So I'd like to see attention to how do we use this support from our city to make those projects happen that wouldn't otherwise happen. And not just to be generally supportive of people who are doing good work, but, we need to make this powerful in getting the units that our community needs. So that would be my preference. Thank you.
Councilmember Borbo.
Thank you. Phil, just want to make sure I understand on the recommendations. People self-help is wanting a letter now, or essentially very close to now, specifically regarding the Del Rio project. But we're giving you generic guidance tonight on what kind of a policy to come back with. So in terms of the letter for them, is that just simply saying, hey, our council is in the process of adopting a deferment thing?
Yes, in a perfect scenario, I think we'll have adopted a policy before a letter goes out to them.
Okay.
I need to find out more about the timing on that letter, but that was in there just in case the timing doesn't work out for us to complete the policy to get back to you. But if that's the case, then the letter is going to have to be more generic along the lines of will allow for deferment.
Right.
Terms.
Because, if we're not being specific tonight, then it becomes like, what are you going to say in the letter?
I did have a conversation with people self-help housing. They did need a commitment. The thing that they had talked about was something starting at 17 years. It's all within the realm that we don't have to hammer out the details, but they were looking for a formal commitment tonight in order to put their application in. If Bill has talked to them since then, we might have a little bit more time, but I do feel like there might be some urgency, which is why we put it on the agenda tonight.
So a commitment, but without the specific details, a commitment that we're going to do something.
A commitment that we are going to defer. We're going to work with them and HCD to make sure that deferment does bump up their points and count as a local contribution, because we do feel that would move that Del Rio Ridge, where we're already committed $400,000 of affordable housing funds, over the line. And then the deferment of this for the low and very low units should get them over that hump.
Okay, but the
but
specific
you're right.
details aren't, still working on those.
We're
Okay,
still working on that. We would put them in with the program.
thank you.
Other than it sounds like you're looking for the word 17 years minimum in there.
That is what he had told me over the phone.
Okay, all right, thank you. Just want to make, understand the, how clear we need to be this evening. And speaking of that, in your staff report, you did mention 17 years as an example of what Paso does. And Councilmember Newsom asked almost exactly the question I was going to ask regarding defaults. Because if I read in this correctly here, we're looking for either interest only or no payments for a period of 17 years. And my concern is, how is an entity, even PFIL self-help, going to go from making no payments or making interest only payments to suddenly coming up with $18,000 times X
So
at the end of 17 years?
typically around year 17, most of these projects refinance. And at that time, they get an infusion of cash and can pay these back.
Okay,
And so that is why they're saying, okay, you have to go out past year 15 to be able to refinance. They typically refinance around that time, get infusion of cash based on the new rental and move forward.
okay. Because I really want to know the answer to Councilmember Newsom's question, because my concern is that you mentioned that cities like SLO, Paso have had this sort of policy in place for a number of years, but a number of years might not be 17 or 30. And I'm wondering how many of them have even reached that point in time to where they have any realized experience as to whether or not the deferred payments are forthcoming, or whether or not there's a follow-on request of, hey, we really, of course, we want to keep these as affordable. Can you defer it another 15, 20, 30 years, or can you waive it? So I really want to know what that experience is elsewhere. In regards to that, on page 186 of the agenda, there's two tables, one regarding maximum rents for the various categories. Not sure how the state thinks acutely is lower than extreme, but it's bureaucratic terminology, but there's one for rents and there's one for maximum sales prices, which would indicate that, to qualify, well, not qualify this specifically, but to qualify as a workforce house that could be sold for 409, but to qualify as acutely low, it would have to be sold for 18,000 or essentially given away. Right, for the price of an impact fee. And my question is, and my concern would be, what I would potentially, depending on the answer to the question, would want to see would be that this applied from our perspective to rentals. That if we're going to defer the impact fee, that it be, with an organization like People Self-Help that would, administer these and make them available and do all the necessary paperwork to ensure they're available to the low, extremely low, and acutely low income people, and not be essentially given to somebody. And that even if we might have a shared equity agreement and all that, that becomes burdensome on staff, and produces a lucky lottery effect for the lucky winner. So could we specify that, this would be for rental only?
Yes, there's another layer of complexity when you get into sales.
Right.
I think we would suggest that we just limit this to rental
Okay,
projects.
got it. In regard to Mayor Pro Tem Funk's question, in terms of like trying to really focus this in on like the extremely low, acutely low. As she asked that question, it made me wonder about, we're talking about People Self-Help as the kind of the primary example of this stuff. But if we had a for-profit developer developing, let's say 100-unit complex, but per our ordinance, they have to provide, let's say 10 affordable units. Could we make this available to them for any units that they designated as extremely low or acutely low?
Yes.
Okay. Well, right. I mean, the question would be, do we want to, really hone in on the acutely low and extremely low and very low, not just the low.
But I think, so well, that's this very first one up here with 5 or more deed restricted residential units that are in the low, very low, or extremely low, and apparently acutely low now. I don't know. Pretty soon we're going to get to micro low. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Just it's a little out of control here, but it seems like this is so potentially what you and council member or Mayor Pro Tem Funk are saying, or that you're not as concerned about the low, but that's more deliberation. I don't necessarily want to get into that right now, but just to clarify what you're asking about is, can we focus towards the very low to
Right.
extreme and acute?
Not asking to make that decision tonight, just want to clarify that that would be something we could specify. We could specify that, hey, this is for very low or extreme, low, acutely micro.
You have that discretion. You can put
Okay.
whatever parameters you'd like.
Okay. And also in terms of the scope of this, we have these RETA numbers for an 8-year cycle, I guess, right? And I know in the city of SLO, and I'm not recalling the specifics, but they had a particular program where they were only offering it for a period of time or until a certain number of units were built. So I guess one of the background questions I'd have is this: let's say RENA says you got to have 100, very low and 100 acutely low or extremely low units. And let's say in your RENA cycle, you somehow achieve 200, or double. Do you get any credit for that going into the next RENA cycle?
Bonus points. Never heard of bonus points, but
Well,
it's a
I've
good
heard of
idea.
brownie
I should
points,
float
but-
that to HCD. I like that.
They'll be all over that.
Well, I've heard of brownie points, which means thank you, but no, you don't get any credit.
No.
And my question would be whether or not we could, if we wanted to specify, partly to encourage timely development of these things, but also to say, this is available up to the number of units in our RENA allocation, and not necessarily go beyond that.
That is certainly a parameter you can do.
Okay. And then, because also to be clear, like people self-help housing, I know city manager and I have spoken of this, that they do not pay property tax, correct?
That is correct.
So, the property tax subsidy here, dwarfs all this other stuff we're doing. But I don't know that we'd want to, do that more and more, because that is, then being directly subsidized by our other property owners, taxpayers in the city. Okay. And last question is, in their letter to you, their first sentence says, our contact at state DGS referenced a deferred impact fee loan possibility for the Atascadero State Hospital site. And the state hospital site is surplus state property that's been identified by them as a potential affordable housing site that they would pursue. But this indicates to me that they're asking, potentially asking the council to consider a deferred fee situation for that as well. But, we're getting slow rolled, in my opinion, I guess, in my term, on our interest in making a trade relative to the Armory property. And so I'm a little concerned about, the state wanting further action from this council when they're not proceeding on a expeditious or even timely basis on making swap relative to the Armory when we've offered other things. But I want to make sure this is what they're asking, or they're indicating here that this is what the state is asking for on a whole entirely different project.
It came up in a conversation. We've had several meetings with them on the state hospital property. We've met with Peoples on the state hospital property. They know that that's one of our programs in our housing element. They know that we're working on this and it could be an option. People's self-help housing is the sole proposer on the state hospital site. They are going after that. They are going to be responsible for paying development impact fees. They are going to be responsible for getting construction permits, and we're working with them and starting a process now. So they're just, sort of dropping that that idea that, perhaps this could be incorporated in that as well. And so I think that's all that's happening.
Yeah.
So,
I'm not saying that's would be a bad thing for us to do. I'm just saying that, we need some reciprocity that shows of equal concern on their part. That we're helping them, they're helping us.
I don't disagree with your frustration of the slow roll. I think as we're looking at this, we have to be somewhat blind to the state owning that property and what's going on there. More of how do we apply this policy broadly for this specific purpose, but I am with you.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I mean, but we need to be careful in how far we apply it and to, maybe we need to look at, that there might be private developers that could benefit from this, who would probably move faster.
Well, but again, I'm probably not going to say, oh, if you're on this piece of property or that piece of property,
Right.
we've got to apply it broadly. And I mean, I think with this, something, whether it's 5 or more deed restricted or some other metric, whether that's for-profit, nonprofit, another NGO, whatever, that has to be consistent across all.
You're absolutely correct. I mean, it's property based. I mean, not property based. It's not property based. It's policy based.
Yep.
But we have to look at the overall impact too of what you're looking at.
Understand.
Because again, I mean, you build another project on state-owned property, again, you're not going to get any property tax revenue
Understand.
as well.
All right. Any other questions before we go to Mayor Pro Tem Funk?
Thank you. I did want to just clarify, listening to Councilmember Verbo's comments, clarify that I am interested in this for low income as well as very low and extremely low. But I'd like us to look at it to have projects include a percentage of those lowest category units. It's not healthy for those projects to have only the poorest of the poor in those units. It doesn't make for healthy, constructive neighborhoods. But if you've got 100 units that we're subsidizing, as in Charles's example, to have 10 or 20 of them be, something in that range, be in that lowest
You
category.
were clear in what you said. Yeah,
Okay.
I have that written down. We're good.
Okay, good. I just, the listening to, because I was hearing Charles go with excluding the low and just focusing on those. And I
It's
do
a
think the subject
conversation
is-
we'll have once we go out. I don't want to get into deliberation right now, but I have both of your things
Okay.
written down and we will get to that.
And if the motion were presented with regard to the second part of this, that to authorize staff to prepare a letter for people's self-help housing that commits the city to offering an impact fee deferral for Del Rio Ridge Affordable Housing Project for a minimum of 17 years with interest terms to be negotiated by staff with people's self-help housing, with the intent that we achieve what is necessary for them to get the points they expected for approval. Would that suffice?
I don't even believe you need to be that specific. Like, staff hears you. As long as you're
Yep.
comfortable with staff working with people's
Yes.
self-help housing and HCD to make sure that it counts, knowing that we're talking generally in the range of 17% with some interest. If we can have some flexibility from that might work better. But yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we're not looking to get into the specifics, and we trust you to work with people self-help on what they need and get that letter written should that move forward tonight. Any other questions? I'm just kind of looking at my squares here. I'm not seeing any, so I'm going to go ahead and open this item to any public comment. Anyone wishing to speak on this item? I see a few handful of members in attendance here on the Zoom webinar, so you can go ahead and raise your hand using that icon at the bottom of the screen. Please do not wait. Go ahead and raise your hand if you'd like to speak on this issue of deferment of impact fees for affordable housing. All right, I'm not seeing any, so I'm going to go ahead and close public comment and bring that back to council. So what I am hearing, I think we have broad agreement that we want to go in this direction of the fee deferral. Was there anyone, Councilmember Newsom?
I'm in agreement with it, but I'm not sure about the term. I just feel like 17 years is not understanding what the default rate is in 17 years seems like that's a really long time to put that out. And then at the end of 17 years, you have a balloon payment, and we're in a situation where the city just suddenly is just going to have to sign off on it. And we've entered into a lot of these transactions because we don't understand what the long-term effects are going to be. And to budget out 17 years, that's without payments, I think is going to be a challenge. So just a little bit more information for me.
So here's the thing, though, in order to do the letter for people's self-help housing, because that is critical tonight, we need to be able to trust staff to go and talk to them and come up with not exact numbers, but if 17 years is the number that we find out has to be the year in order for them to get credit, that's what would need to go into the letter, is my understanding. So while we're not getting down to the specifics of exactly what it is, there could be something like that 17-year that needs to go into that letter.
And every other person that comes and asks for it is guaranteed 17 years of deferred impact by precedent.
Well, it wouldn't be by precedent. It would be, by policy that we put into place. Yeah.
So just because you chose to award people self-help housing a deferred impact fee does not mean you have to award every project that comes before you the deferred impact fee. Similar to us awarding the 400,000 in affordable fees to the people self-help housing project, there are many other projects where we have not awarded any city funds. So that is still at your discretion. So you kind of want to take the people self-help housing letter for Del Rio Ridge as one thing, and then we can bring back a policy to you. At that time, we'll find out a little bit more about the default rates, find a little bit more about how other cities are structuring this, what HCD is counting, what HCD is not counting. So we have that information to you as we bring you the policy.
I can live with that.
Okay.
I just don't want to blanket. We agree to all of these, and everybody who comes up and we enter into more than we get back.
Understand. Is there a way that as you draft a policy, because as you said, part of the reason we don't grant everybody the $400,000 that we did to people self-help is we don't have, unlimited funds to, in this sense, the impact fee deferral would be unlimited in that we're not having to give it. We would just be waiving it, or not waiving it, sorry, delaying it. Get that word out of my mouth.
Yeah.
Not waiving, deferring. So we could ask staff to come back with some sort of policy that would have some sort of threshold or some sort of vetting process by which you would defer fees for a particular applicant.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And that was my concern. And she pretty much answered that essentially I'm willing to, give this kind of letter to, we need public comment, but I would be inclined to give this sort of letter to people self-help based partly though on their track record and history. And that would be something you could address, like I think you're alluding to in the policy that, the term, could even be based on, past experience or something like that.
Okay.
For
And
now.
I would say that I'm not opposed to what both of my colleagues on either side of me have been saying about the very low, the extremely low. But Director, you did say that, the more limits or sort of things that we put in place, the more challenging that could be. So, it's something that, if we have consensus on that, to look into what would the options be, but also if you see that it boxes in and suddenly you're accomplishing nothing because we've put in parameters in place like a 20% threshold or 10% for very low or whatever it might be, that suddenly they can't meet. And then therefore the whole project is a no-go, and then we don't get the low units that we might have gotten, or even, a smaller percentage of very low. So is that enough direction to come back with something
Yes.
that meets that? Okay. Okay, good. So let's see, we've got the information on defaults, structure, what counts, what doesn't count, writing the letter for people self-help housing based on what's needed, focusing on the very low units. How could we do that? What would be the parameters, the sort of policy we'd have for vetting applicants, other things that we would want to make sure are included. We looking good here?
I think that's good because, yeah, you want to kind of encourage the low, very low, but not block them in, not box them in.
Yeah.
So I
Right.
agree. That's very appropriate.
And I
That,
would-
that is consistent with my interest as well, just to bring,
Excellent.
bring us back some considerations on that. So that we can evaluate the impact.
Perfect.
And I would, in deference
Would you
to
like to make the motion?
Council members Newsom's concerns, note that, I've had quite a few conversations with folks developing this kind of housing and working on it with Kendra Hugh in particular. And the 17-year deferral is very standard that I can confirm what City Manager Rickard told us that the refi that happens then is typical in this industry. And this is the main mechanism by which this type of housing is getting built.
Would you like to make the
So
motion?
I would love to. So I would like to authorize staff to prepare a letter for people's self-help housing that commits the city to offering an impact fee deferral for their Del Rio Ridge affordable housing project, with terms to be determined by staff using guidance of council tonight.
I'll second.
We have a motion by Mayor Pro Tem Funk, a second by Councilmember Newsom. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Newsom,
Yes.
Councilmember Warbo,
Yes.
Councilmember Dares,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Funk,
Yes.
Mayor Moreno.
Yes, ma'am.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Why don't we take about a 5-6 minute break here, 7:50, about a 5-minute break, and we'll come on back for our final item. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, so actually, I can. No. Are they all turned off? Oh, okay. So we'll go ahead and get started if everybody wants to take their seats. All right. Put a little Dr. Pepper. All right. All right, council is just returning from a brief break, and we are now moving on to our item D1 study session, which is our 2023 draft action plan. And for those of you that aren't here in person, you're watching on Zoom or listening, we just had all this staff materialize from out of nowhere because they're part of the draft action plans. It's kind of like a little revisit of our strategic planning. So fun to see all of your smiling faces, and can't wait to hear from you on the work that you've been doing. So I will turn this over to our city manager, Ms. Rickard.
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight, you will be happy to know there's no PowerPoint involved. We are going to run this a lot more like a study session or workshop, a lot more like our strategic planning sessions that we typically do in January. There will be no staff presentation, council questions, public comment, and then council deliberation. I'm really looking for more of a discussion as things come up, just some ideas. Mayor, periodically, if you could see who might be raising their hands in the public or out here in the audience, similar to what we did at strategic planning, that would be great.
All right, so that's what we're going to do. I want to let those of you in the public know, and I'm also going to give out that call information again in case you happen to be listening on KPRL, or maybe you're watching on channel 20 or YouTube. And if you want to call in, the number is 669-900-6833. Again, 669-900-6833. And the meeting ID is 889-2347-9018. One more time, 889-2347-9018. And again, at atascadero.org, you can go right to the council agenda, and front page will have all that information. So those of you that are in the Zoom meeting, what we'll, as the city manager said, is we're going through items. If I haven't seen any hands raised, I'll, kind of come over there and say, okay, do we have any comments? So we're not going to just one time open and then one time close, but if we're on a particular topic, we kind of have three strategic areas, and maybe we kind of look for each of those strategic areas to have some input from the public. So I'll make sure that I say something. If I don't recognize your hand right away, it might be because we're kind of finishing something up, but we won't leave that topic without getting to you. And if I don't see it, one of my fellow council members will tell me the hand is there. So, all right.
Thank you, Mayor. As I said, this is the draft city action plan. We are not adopting anything tonight. Council met in January to give us some direction and set some strategic priorities. The council then adopted both those strategic priorities and those key focus areas under each of the strategic priorities as a follow-up to the March meeting. As a follow-up at a March meeting. We also, since council met and set those strategic priorities and key focus areas, staff has been getting together and discussing what are we going to do to move those areas forward in the next 2-year budget planning cycle. We typically look at that 2-year time frame because that matches our budget. We do have some items that stretch out a little bit further, but you do want to know those are coming up and talking about that. So I am just going to dive in, and what we're looking for is some general feedback. I'll be taking notes, as will some of the others on the exec team here. We're not looking for, exact consensus, but we do want to know some general directions, or, hey, what does that mean? What does that look like? Type of thing, because as I said, a lot of this information will help us build our budget. So I'm going to start with economic and community vibrancy. That was one of our strategic priorities, and under there's 4 key focus areas: downtown vitality, activation of underutilized sites and nodes, business support and jobs, housing balance, and neighborhood compatibility and wellness. And Luke, if I could have you pull that the draft action plan up. For downtown vitality, in the next 2 years, probably the biggest change is going to be the downtown infrastructure enhancement plan. That's a massive project that's exciting. It's going to add a bunch more parking. We did a lot of public outreach. By some miracle, there was, pretty much consensus on a lot of items. Those items where you might have had some division, everybody said, well, I like this and that, but this may be a little bit more. So they are busy designing that. We expect that to be constructed in next summer, right? Summer of 2024. As part of that, we want to make sure that we are doing a very targeted, very high touch campaign. First to those businesses to let them know, what's going to be open, what's going to be closed. All of the businesses will be able to remain open during construction. We want to make sure the public knows that. How can you get there? People sometimes see orange cones and do that. So that'll be part of this 2-year action plan about talking to the businesses so they can know what to expect and plan accordingly, and talking to our residents, making sure they're still supporting those businesses during this construction phase and doing that. We also have a downtown paving project that will be taking place this summer. That's going to be doing roads like Palma and Lewis Avenue and Trotta, Traffic Way, lots of those. So that's going to be exciting. We want to continue the street renewal program. We did a bunch of the tree wells. We changed those out. We added some trees. We removed a lot of those Rayburn ashes that were causing some problems, and the decorative plums that were dropping all the plums. So we'll continue that. And part of that, we want to do a downtown streetscape education program with those businesses, kind of get them to take ownership. Our Muni Code does require that people are responsible for the trees and sidewalk adjacent to their homes. And sometimes that they're just surprised by that. And so we're going to have a little bit of a campaign on that. The BIA and the chamber are going to be installing lights on Entrada. So we're hoping to have that. We are facilitating that, trying to help them with all those, how you can actually do that and maintain that. This is a carryover from the last one. We're going to continue to maintain the Atascadero Creek as a quality aesthetic feature. We really do want to encourage those homeless that use the creek or live in the creek to place their trash in the voluntary orange bag program. So we're going to continue to have the orange bag program, give them a way to get rid of the trash that they generate. Unlike you and I, they don't have trash service, and we don't want all that ending up in the creek. We're going to do some vegetation management, and we are definitely going to be doing a lot of debris cleanup from the storms. There's lots and lots of vegetative debris and litter and other stuff that just came down. Restaurant loan program should be kicking off and going great guns during the next 2-year period. And then Phil is very ambitiously going to be doing a lot under this action plan. So he wants to explore zoning code changes to increase vibrancies. One of the areas where he said is there a way, we've talked about it a lot, to either incentivize or enforce regular operating hours in our downtown? That is a hard one to, it's just a detriment to the other businesses. When you have several businesses that are closed, you don't have enough synergy to make things vibrant. So that is something that we could explore. And same thing with retail zoning in the downtown. That's another area. We're just kind of refine that definition a little bit more so that we don't have some of those non pedestrian friendly, non retail stores. You can sell, I don't know, if you're selling carburetors, for tractors. Most of it's a male business. It does count as retail. That may not be what we want there in the downtown. So we're going to consider upzoning mixed use potential. We've talked about that. Explore incentives and code revisions to expedite the relocation of non-conforming uses and the occupancy of vacant buildings in the downtown. These are what we've very politely called owner constrained buildings. What can we do to incentivize and or regulate to get those moving? And then consider adjusting building height limitations in the downtown. Right now, there is a 3-story limit. Most of, particularly along the freeway side, we wanted to, from once upon a time, we wanted to make sure that people could see from the freeway into the downtown. Right now, our historic city hall, you have that corridor where you can see. You have beautiful plaza. So do we want to do anything more there? We want to engage property owners and tenants to encourage compatible development of vacant lots. And especially vacant lots in Colony Square. And we want to facilitate continued operation of the downtown theater. There is still some COVID issues left over and some predatory lending practices that put that in jeopardy. We do want to make sure that we're facilitating all of the underutilized properties along Sunken Gardens, both East and West Mall. And don't forget, we have those properties there on East Mall. You guys have adopted a PD for that with very strict. We have gone through the process of the state process for affordable housing. We now just have to put them out to bid to get those proper developer there. We do want to consider some incentives to get the proper developer. It's very important to get that kickoff to try and get that. We want you to at least consider some of those as we do that. How do we make sure that we get that restaurant or some of that as opposed to just selling them for market value? You can sell them for less type of thing. We aggressively, as Councilmember Bourbeau was talking about, want to pursue the Armory site as a potential location for the Public Safety Center, Fire Station number 1. We want to implement Police Department special assignment position to provide a liaison to address downtown concerns. So one officer that part of their duties would be going and talking with businesses or walking around the downtown. We think that would be a huge help both in providing a higher service level for the downtown and reducing the number of calls that our regular patrol officers will have to be responding to all the time. We have acknowledged historical significance and importance of the printery in the downtown. And then a lot of stuff on events, First Fridays, some events around the plaza, and of course, continuing with all of those wonderful, successful events that we have. And then, as always, we want to communicate collaboratively with businesses to encourage a sense of pride, ownership, positive attitude, and harmony that promotes downtown vibrancies. So that is our plan for downtown vitality. I don't know if council has any comments. We can just take a break. Maybe I'll open it up after each key focus, if you don't mind, Mayor, just a little bit.
I said one quick question regarding the downtown. You talked about the actions already taken relative to some of the trees. We had talked during one of those discussions about having sponsorships for the trees so that Mark and I could have Rotary and Kiwanis compete on sponsoring trees. And but I'm wondering, or do we still have that in mind?
Yeah, we sure can. We haven't really made outreach to those organizations, but Mr. Betts, my department, can certainly do that. And, put a little plaque in the sidewalk or whatever next to those, not a big plaque because they're expensive, but a smaller plaque.
A Post-it note.
Yeah, it's about doing good though, right? Not bragging rights too, I suppose. But yeah, we can reach out to those groups and present to them and start doing that. We kind of given the business owners a first opportunity to take ownership on that, and some have, and the trees that we have planted for them, they've been watering and taking care of. So it's been so far so good.
Thank you.
I was curious about the basically going higher with the downtown properties. So you said we currently have a 3-story limit in downtown. And what we're saying here then is look at the feasibility of going higher, or what exactly are we thinking about there?
Certainly, you're looking at that potential option. Should we go higher? Should the downtown allow sort of the highest commercial building heights in the commercial corridor? A lot of downtowns do that. They, in our case, it might just mean, should we go to 4 stories instead of 3? 4 is really the maximum you can really, adequately serve with our fire department without getting, more significant infrastructure in place. And there are buildings that are beginning to request looking at that, that 4-story, that extra opportunity, whether it's hotel rooms or whether it's additional residential units, mixed use above. Should that be an option? And could that be an incentive to seeing some of the changeover on some of the vacant sites moving forward, without exceeding the general height of the city hall and really
And
minimizing this
certainly,
building
yeah.
as well as the other thing too.
Yeah.
Already we're 65.
City Hall needs to read.
Yeah. So
For sure.
yeah, but that's going to be hard to do with this. jump.
True.
I mean, this is something that I, had asked us to look at, but I think I expected it in the context of the general plan.
And it can be
update.
referred to that as well. So just
So-
because it's here doesn't mean we have to do this right now. That can be explored with the general plan, but the general plan does create these sort of blanket policies. It doesn't get into zoning and implementation. Now, after we do the general plan, we're going to need to update our zoning, and that's where that would happen. But having this policy or having this in in our sort of our strategic plan is sort of our idea. Okay, should we even keep this on paper? That's something we want to think about for the general plan or for a future zoning update.
I don't know. I was one who asked for it, so I very much want to see it occur at some point in time or another.
Yeah.
Yeah, on that particular point, I like Councilmember Bourbeau, I was thinking that this would be something we'd address in the general plan. And actually, because of the impact of that, I'd like to see us be specific about that in the general plan so that we can have that conversation with the community about that. Because there are parts of downtown where 4 stories would be kind of a no-brainer and not be something that would interfere with sightlines to City Hall or be disruptive, and other areas that maybe that would be a little bit less comfortable. And we should have that conversation with the community as much as we can so that you're not doing double work. That would be my suggestion.
I think the real question is, where does that belong? Because I think several of us thought that was general plan. And then, in my conversations with the city manager to find out that's not exactly what it is. So clearly that means we haven't understood where that fits. So
Well,
how do we
the-
have that conversation? How do we have that community give input? Because there's some that I'm sure are going to be like, yep, let's go up. And others
Yeah.
that are like, wow,
Yeah.
we've already gone high and I'm concerned about more. So where
It
does that
could-
fit in?
It could actually start with the general plan. It could be part of that. And a policy, for example, you might talk about a series of policies about downtown revitalization, right? And in that, it might be a program in the general plan that says, explore additional building height in the downtown as a way to incentivize the development of key particular commercial nodes in strategic locations such as X, Y, and Z. The general plan can do that. It doesn't have to say, hey, we're going to authorize you to have now 45 feet of height in the downtown. That's an implementation of the general plan policy. So it can start with the general plan in a general way and then be implemented by the zoning ordinance at a later date when we implement general plan policies.
Okay. So once the general plan's in place, then we come and we come behind that with zoning policies and pass and
Yes.
change the zoning code. And that's where that would then come into play with a robust community outreach on that.
Correct. Yeah. So we would assume that this general plan, as it updates our land use element, is going to trigger automatically a need for an update of our zoning ordinance because it'll change
Right.
the zoning districts a little bit. It might change densities a little bit. It might change overall land use policies a little bit.
Okay.
So,
So if it's in here, it's fine, but really where we're going to see it taking place is with the general plan and the
Yes.
zoning code follow-up.
yes.
Okay, great. Other questions in this downtown vitality area?
Yeah, I wasn't quite done there. I did want to come back to the printery item. And that's, which is just acknowledge historical significance and importance of the printery. As we're looking at the workflow of this, I would like to see that be something where we're a little bit more active, probably in the second year, not the first year, because you've got a lot on your plate right now. But to look at specifically grant writing support or grant identification support, the kinds of things that our staff or a contract grant writer could help identify opportunities where folks might be a little more responsive to a city than to a random not-for-profit organization as far as other entities are concerned. So I think that a small amount of effort there could be really strategic in trying to move forward with that becoming the really strategic asset that it can be to our community. I'd also, as we're thinking about this, there's a lot on ComDev's plate in this community development, in this section and throughout. So just be really attentive to the phasing of this work. I would suggest we think about we're all really eager to move the non-conforming uses out of downtown, but maybe the time that we focus on that is right after we get construction moving ahead well on the downtown infrastructure improvement, so that businesses can see, who might replace those non-conforming uses, can see how profitable it will be to have other uses in those locations. And what we're trying to do is to create an environment where it is profitable for people to do the kind of uses that we want to see in the community from private business. So that would be my suggestion.
Very logical, because really what happens as you invest in your downtown and we do the downtown infrastructure plan and we get a few new businesses, automatically property values come up and these things naturally happen rather than happen forcefully. And so that might just happen anyway. That's what typically happens in the evolution of a downtown. So totally logical.
I do want to say, I think Sheila knew, Councilmember Warble reminded me that you had said you had a question on page 198. And if it falls under this downtown that we're talking about now, if you want to raise your hand, if it falls under activation of underutilized sites and nodes, then you can wait a minute. There you are, Sheila. Come on down. There's not a code when you're on the phone, there's a code, but not when you're. Sheila, you are still muted. If you want to, if you're on your computer or on your phone, there should be a little microphone icon for you. There you go. You appear to be unmuted, but I'm not hearing you. Luke, can you tell what's maybe catching up there? Sheila, do you maybe have I see that you're unmuted on Zoom, but perhaps are you using a headset or something where you have a mute button pushed? Okay, see if you can see. We heard you earlier, so see if you can figure that out. Let's go to Karen McNamara and then Sheila will come back to you, but see if you've maybe your audio source, something, check on your computer. And Karen, you'll need to unmute. You're still muted, Karen.
There it is. Thank you.
There you go. Hi.
Thank you, Mayor, Council, and staff for your work regarding the historic value that exists in our city, and for your insight into the value of the Printery as a vitally important piece to our community. Every day, the members of the Printery Foundation Board are urged by residents and visitors in our region to open the doors of our amazing piece of history for use by all. Doing so will have such a great impact in multiple facets to the community. High on that list are great economic benefits and much greater access to the arts in the North County. The arts are universal and extremely valuable to humanity. During the COVID crisis, the Department of Health and Human Services declared the arts an essential service, as the lack of access to arts programming was an elemental factor in the decline of mental well-being. The work of the Atascadero Printery Foundation is to be a uniting force for the completion of our project. We're making great strides, garnering support of those in our region, supporters abroad, and with multiple government levels. Any support from the city is extremely valuable to us. We're very grateful for every meeting and effort that has been put forward by the mayor, council members, and staff members. And we look forward to working closely together as we progress. And we thank you for putting this importance into your plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McNamara. Sheila, let's give it a try.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Right, great. Well, Karen said it all, but I will add a few things. I am Sheila New. I'm with the Printery Foundation. I'm also with Questers, and we do appreciate your support and would like to let you know of our progress in the last six years since the foundation was formed. Karen, the foundation was formed in 2017. Agua Caliente, the local Questers chapter, got involved in February of 2000. We were so excited with the possibilities of this project that we presented it to the state membership in May that year, and they unanimously voted to adopt it. Their first project was the renovation of the front doors and transoms, which were completed last fall. The board has raised funds to shore up the gym in anticipation of removing the non-historic structures, and we are in talks with the local contractor to start renovations on the very many windows in that place. And we're always fundraising for the seismic retrofit that needs to be done. The foundation has built a great board of directors and pool of volunteers. And that's what I want you to let you guys know, that we have a lot of community support, and we're getting more and more. Every time we're out in the public, it raises interest and awareness of our commitment to this building. And APAC has recently dissolved and joined under our umbrella. So they're part of the Printery Foundation. So they will be helping us. They bring history, they bring volunteers. And we're very excited that they've joined forces with us. We've successfully applied for grants, and we're always looking for more opportunities to raise funds. And Susan, I appreciate your comment that, to see if the city could help us in that avenue. We do really appreciate your support. Hope you can help us in achieving our goal of completing this project. We would like to invite you to our next two fundraisers. We're doing our Off the Wall art show, which will be held in conjunction with the Chamber's Sip and Stroll event. And it will be held at the Bridgeworks offices from 5:30 to 8 p.m. That's May 5th. Lots of local artists, lots of really fun stuff. So you don't want to miss that. And on May 13th, we'll have our Mother's Day spring event market from 10 to 3 on the Printery grounds. There will be 13 vendors. And if you've pre-ordered your Mother's Day lasagna meals, you can pick them up that day. So we hope that you'll come visit these events and support the Printery. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sheila. I do see a few other members of the Printery Foundation. If this is the item you wanted to speak on, this would be the now that would be the time to do that. Not that you can't come at another point and speak on other things, but let's talk about the Printery now, if that was going to be your the thing you wanted to touch base on. So I'm not seeing any hands raised, but if you want to, okay. So with regards to, I had to smile a little bit because to use the term grant write and grant support and the term little bit of help was not quite the way it works. I mean, you know that grant writing is a very significant undertaking. And so I would maybe look to our city manager to see, like, in the terms of, the type of support that we would have capacity to offer, and it's not just this year, it's next year, it's every year that we have a very tight plate. We've had to say no to a lot of things, a lot of very good things, because we can't do it all. So what could we offer in terms of support within this context that would be useful to the printery, but that we would have capacity to do without pushing other things aside?
Absolutely. I think when we're saying acknowledge historical significance and importance of the printery, there are some steps that we can do proactively to try and just bring more light on the printery. I think as you go into, in terms of grant writing, the city has to hire the grant writer, and there's only a few projects that they can focus on. And so you would have to look at all of your other priorities and those supplemental lists and most millions, and basically say, okay, what do we want to bump off to do that? We do also need to explore what would trigger prevailing wage for the project and what would not trigger prevailing wage if we're putting in resources or doing things on their behalf. So we can spend some time with Brian on that. In talking with staff or texting with staff here, there are some concerns. A lot of the funding is tied to the CLG program. There are other programs out there because it is on the National Historic Registry that you don't have to be in the CLG, but those are, they're tax credit programs and other programs. Or we have a CLG program here in Atascadero, which is a much bigger undertaking. So there aren't a ton of things we can do other than be supportive. We can do some promotions of their fundraising events if the council authorizes that specifically, and why we do that. And we can always ask our grant writers, hey, if you see something or we hear of something, we can certainly pass those things along to the printery. Or if you want to go the step further and actually dedicate funds. But I want to caution on that. I definitely would want to check with the city attorney and make sure it doesn't mess with their project.
Okay, thank you. Other comments with regards to downtown? Susan.
Yeah, I just to clarify further, what I was thinking was a pretty targeted action where we would, in particular, the city can help identify things, much as we just saw with the broadband, where it was really helpful to have somebody with a level of connections. So for grants that are involved in public processes, as opposed to, say the Bezos Foundation or whatever, the public grants, the city's connections and the city's stature might be helpful in getting information, in positioning things, and in offering guidance, without necessarily the city taking on this as one of 3 or 4 grants that are written, but to identify and facilitate that grant process. By having our specialized person do that. And I think that there's an avenue there that it could be valuable. And again, I think that's probably a year out, but is something that could be done.
I think when we say identify and facilitate, that's not super specific, and you start to get certain expectations. And what we did with broadband was a really huge undertaking. So there are a lot of very good projects out there, the printery being one of them. And as the city manager said, for us to dedicate funds to that, we're going to then have to take them from something else. So we have to be very clear. And I'm very cautious that with anything we do, we don't just say, okay, facilitate and kind of help with this. That sounds sort of nebulous. And then pretty soon there's this expectation, and now other things go off the plate. So I am more tempted to go with the recommendation that the city manager has had as the types of proactive steps that we can bring more attention to if we come across grant writing opportunities, and yes, facilitate where we can. But if we're giving staff direction to be spending time, i.e. resources on that, then we have to tell them where not to spend it. So I'm hesitant to do that.
I totally understand the mayor's comments and Mayor Pro Tem Funk's comments. And I would be concerned about my biggest concern would be what the city manager mentioned about, you step too far into something and you might trigger prevailing wage, which would, blow their costs out of the water and defeat the purpose. But there may be things that could be done with minimal staff time that could help, and maybe wouldn't help and there'd be no reason to do them. But I can think of something like in order to help our downtown businesses with the ABC permitting licensing issues, we declare this as a downtown nightlife district or whatever we called it. If it would help for us to declare a certain portion of the downtown an arts district or something like that. If that would be helpful in any way to the Princeton Foundation pursuing grants, wouldn't be an expenditure of money, be a small expenditure of staff time. Just looking for those sort of things that might not take much time at all, but if they had the potential to help the Princeton Foundation towards its goal, which is their success. If they're successful, that's an important achievement for the city and for the rejuvenation of downtown. So it does warrant some consideration, I think, of things that we can do, as long as, like you said, Mayor, we don't step too far down that path.
Does that give staff sort of an idea of what we're looking at? Like, how can we be helpful? It sounds like the city manager, you had some ideas and sense of what that could be, coupled with what Councilmember Borbo has brought up.
Absolutely. And obviously, we definitely want to help all of our nonprofits. And if we do see grant opportunities, we do try and pass those along. Like that. Fantastic. Thank you.
All right. Are we ready to move on to activation of underutilized sites and nodes? Okay. Let's go.
Okay. Next key focus area under economic vitality is activation of underutilized sites and nodes. Consider developing design themes for commercial nodes. That is something that we've been talking about as part of the El Camino plan and some of those other things. We may even, when we talk about node, it might not be an intersection, it might be an area or some of that. We can complete our transportation operational analysis, develop a transportation concept plan, and adopt plan lines at the nodes. As part of this is a lot of engineering speak, can you tell? What we were talking about as part of the general plan, there is a whole transportation element, and we're going to have a lot of base data as part of that. It would be good, now's the time to take that one step further, instead of just saying, okay, you need to make improvements at curb rail or whatever. What are those improvements? Start getting you adopt plan lines. So as things develop, we're developing them in the right way and we have a plan. So we'd like to start that effort probably more closer to the second year. Investigate potential rezone and road abandonment for the Oaks Shopping Center. That's the Spencer's there. There are two roads that go very close and join right there, kind of where Guest House Grill is. We've talked about if we abandoned the road between, the old Players and the Spencer Shopping Center, you have some more room to do things and look at that. Creatively support retail or hospitality build out of the Spring Hill and Home Depot. They do have some approvals there. We do try and help that, and facilitate redevelopment of underutilized industrial zone sites. Via Sycamore have quite a few properties there. I'm going to jump into the next one before we take a break. The downtown was a little bit longer. Under some business support and jobs housing balance, basically make sure that we're pursuing policies and land uses that try and bring those jobs here into town. The jobs are important both to get that daytime population and some of those restaurants, retail, and other things that all of us residents want, plus for the economic viability of the city. That jobs housing balance is important. So we're going to complete the general plan update and begin general plan implementation strategies designed to streamline some of the zoning and continue to work towards meeting our RENA affordable housing goals. Certainly as part of the general plan, we didn't put it here, making sure that jobs housing balance is one of our key priorities will be important. We're going to continue to facilitate enhancement of the fiber optic broadband infrastructure access. A lot of those recommendations you read about in the strategic plan are also here in our 2-year planning horizon. Everything from leveraging broadband funds and changing our permitting. We are talking about bringing to you new fees, our annual update in May. And as part of that, we are going to ask you to consider setting the fee for installation of fiber encroachment permits at 0, just to try and facilitate that fiber thing. We're going to investigate ways we can support and capitalize on the proposed spaceport that is being worked on in Paso Robles. We want to help our neighbors, and conversely, that will bring a lot more of that economic activity that we are looking for here to Atascadero. One of these is, this actually was wording from strategic planning on look for ways to toot our own horn and continue to publish proof that we're easy to work with. We do hear it a lot from a lot of people that we do a good job. What we don't always do a good job is talking about those ahead of time. And so trying to do that. We do want to do a business attraction social media campaign. We've kind of stuck our toe in that water, but have not done a concentrated. The Chamber of Commerce and some others will be doing that. We want to be able to support that effort and keep those things moving. And we want to support our regional economic development efforts. All boats rise together. So that's a good thing. At strategic planning, looking for ways to expand our family entertainment opportunities was very important. So we will see what we can do to do that and look for opportunities on that. A lot of times with these economic development opportunities, if you know kind of where we're going and we have these things laid out, when somebody comes in, we're going, okay, that's an opportunity. We don't know exactly what that means, but we know that you guys said that's important and we're going to jump on it. And then continue to support the chamber and other nonprofit partnerships. I'll finish up with downtown vitality with neighborhood compatibility and wellness. We're going to establish objective design guidelines to support quality development and transitions between zoning districts. And we are going to produce some educational material too about zoning. A lot of times, both the developers and their neighbors don't understand. So people get very frustrated with you guys in particular on why didn't you stop that? Well, that's an allowed use in that zone, and trying to have some handouts for people on that. We're always looking for trail and pedestrian connections where appropriate. And on here, we do have the explore options for short-term rental ordinance. So those are the other 3 key focus areas under economic vitality. I'm looking for any input council might have.
So what I know, kind of one end to the other, and maybe I'll start with Councilmember Newsom, and then we'll just kind of come down the way and see if there's other comments on under this economic vitality section.
Thank you. I think that we were very successful at our strategic planning and put a lot of great ideas down on the plan. Action plan. I think at this point, I think you as staff are doing a great job in continuing the next steps on some of the places that we, like you said, putting your toe and, trying to fill it out for a little bit. So I look forward to what's to come, and I don't have anything more to add to it.
A couple of things with regard to that on the first bullet point under activation of underutilized sites, where it talks about consider development of designed themes for commercial nodes. I think my real interest there is not so much theme in the sort of architectural sense, but theme in terms of the usage. Because to my mind, what makes those commercial nodes work is synergistic usages. So that this is a place, if we have a medical node, if you think about that this is a place where you would see your doctor and your dentist, and you'd have the chiropractor and the acupuncturist, and not necessarily auto repair. So whereas we could have all of those different things with different architectural looks, and the usage would work together. So that's my comment there. And then on the the last two bullet points in the neighborhood compatibility and wellness. I want to give a big shout out to the staff for getting the social media promotion and all of the things on the website with our new ADU plans, and remind everybody that we have stock plans for ADUs now. So the accessory dwelling units, if you want to build that granny flat on the property, there's some great plans you can just work with if you talk with staff first and figure out your site. I would like staff to be available for workshops and outreach for that. But I don't think staff has the time to put any workshops together. So much as I would love to have staff do organized workshops, I think that availability would suffice. And then on the short-term rental ordinance, I could encourage us to be talking about the principles around neighborhood quality that are embedded in that as in the context of the general plan, so that we make sure that we're building a foundation for the conversation that needs to happen with the community about a short-term rental ordinance. That's it for me.
Councilmember Borbo, I know that's a topic that you particularly wanted to bring up, so.
Yeah, I will mention that in a second. On activation of underutilized sites and nodes, I didn't have any questions. I would just comment to you that having been on the council in 1987, 88, we had a vote on whether or not to close the road between Players and that shopping center. I voted to close it, but it lost 3-2 to allow the expansion of that shopping center. So old ideas seem to come back around in time. And no questions or comments regarding the business support, jobs, housing, and balance. Liked all of those things. I was indeed the one that asked that we discuss options for a short-term rental ordinance. One of the concerns, of course, is how much staff time that would take, and that's a very valid concern. My take on it, though, would be that we could perhaps start that off with not a staff report, but simply a discussion at council about what we're looking for and solicit impact from the public, or input from the public, if you will, before we, burden staff with pursuing anything in particular. So, but because that's something I very much think needs to be addressed.
So I'm curious, if we did get a bunch of input and we were all excited about it, we would look to staff and say, okay, how many hours is this going to take? And we'd say, okay, we're pushing back the general plan, or we're pushing back.
No, we would,
design
but
standards.
that's the whole.
What I'm just asking, like, how you would see that move, or would we say, okay, we see there's an interest in this, and so maybe 2 years out, we take a look, or I'm just kind of wondering what your.
Well, my point is I don't want to say that we expect staff to write a 30-page report and and go check with every city in the county and what they did and how long it took and this and that and the other thing, because that's sometimes the concern, is that we want to discuss something and we expect a major staff report. And I'm saying we can have a discussion about the principles, about why this warrants consideration, see what the public thinks, then give staff guidance. And that guidance could be, hey, this is really important. Let's start spending some time and effort. No, let's incorporate this discussion into the general plan update, or maybe let's don't pursue it.
Okay, that's what I was asking.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's clear.
Just trying to be cognizant of the fact that obviously doing things requires staff time, and I want to minimize. Sometimes what we need to have is a discussion, and not make a big deal out of it up front.
Got it. Yeah. All right. Councilmember Darris.
Comment on the, consider for developing the themes for commercial nodes, which I am in favor of. I think zoning will take care of the usage that Councilor or Mayor Pro Tem Funk was mentioning. But the themes, if you want to call it themes, but design styles, I think having certain areas that are similar in an area, create Spanish style or whatever, without being too specific. But I think a risk that you run into is, I've been in lots of neighborhoods that were done, say, in the 70s, and they still look like it was done in the 70s. So we don't want to create something we're gonna go, whoops, what did we do 10 years ago?
Well, that's the
years ago?
1970s.
I know. So
Area.
I do like, nodes in certain areas of town to be somewhat similar, like downtown, we have all our historic buildings, and they have the plaza really utilize that vernacular, that architectural style. Just to see that type of thing happening around town in certain areas, I think is a really good idea, but I think we've got to be really careful with all that stuff. So, anyhow, thank you.
I want to say that you all have done a tremendous job bringing this back. You know, we had a really great time at strategic planning. Of course, staff's like a really great time, really, Mayor. But I thought it was wonderful. And I was sitting there thinking like, gosh, everything has really been coming together and we have so much momentum and it's really exciting to be a part of this council team that we have and to have the staff that we do. And this action plan really took the mission and the objectives that we had, and you really came back with some really good action steps here. You know, on that short-term rental ordinance, you know, I don't disagree. And I think we need to have that conversation because you're talking, you know, neighborhood compatibility for sure. And then of course, we're also talking the issue of housing and how many homes have been taken off the market and how is that impacting housing? Because that, of course, with our you know, RENA, the housing element, everything that we're working on. So as much as it's one of those things that it could take a lot of time, we need to see, is that some time that we need to invest? Is it important enough to do that? So yeah, that initial conversation I think would be very useful. All right. Anything else on this topic? All right, let's move on.
Can I just make sure I understand? So I have notes on stuff, but just on the nodes a little bit, we did have design themes. So we were thinking architectural. I heard something different from Councilmember Funk. I think we are going to be, as part of our zoning and probably some of our policies for the general plan, trying to tighten up some of our zoning districts so we don't have one long meet all. Were you really looking for, hey, this area, not just to be office, but just to be concentrated on medical? Do I have?
I
Well, I
think
think Councilmember Newsom.
I was gonna say, I think some of that topic comes from design review committee. A
Okay.
lot of times you guys present us something at DRC and we're like, so, okay, how does this fit into that? So in the past, Phil, you were talking about architectural structures, themes, things that kind of met that design for that area so that it seems compatible, not just, you know, all of us work in complexes where there's like a gamut of different, I'm in a dental zone right now. I'm probably the only dentist not in there. Kidding. Attorneys and lawyers that like dentists. So that's how that topic came up, but I'll let Susan speak to that.
Yeah, I think it comes around to part of a little bit to the thing that Max Zappis had brought to us about thinking about what our commercial nodes need to be. And because if we think about what type of commercial environment we're seeking to have be created there, different types of commercial environments have different draws and have different needs for residential housing density to make them work. So if you want to have a neighborhood with a cute little neighborhood market, you've got to have enough housing density around that and enough synergistic businesses to make that market pencil out, or it doesn't happen, as we've seen down at Dove Creek Commercial all this time. So I'm mindful of that kind of thinking. I'd like us to be, without getting too incredibly prescriptive, be thinking about the character of particular areas and what businesses are already there, how we might help create greater synergy about the experience. And maybe if to Councilmember Dares's, that maybe if there's a design element that could help establish that, I don't object to that, but I am thinking about the functionality of that and how it is that the business environment is successful so that residents get the experience that they want.
I feel like that's a very good consideration, but I feel like it's something we'll probably be addressing in general plan update. Would it not be?
We have to certainly be careful that the general plan isn't this catch-all for everything.
Okay.
That we keep throwing things into.
Come
It
on,
can't.
director.
It can. This is something it certainly can. And so we do talk about community design in the general plan. We do talk about land use in the general plan. And those things come together where you can provide specific broad policy direction that you'd like to establish, these design areas or these nodes or these things in the city. So certainly it can be touched on there. It doesn't get fully ironed out there. So direction can be provided through policy to help get there.
Okay, thank you.
I'm curious because the sites, when we did the corridor study, there were a handful of sites, I want to say 3 or 4 that were selected to say, these are, if they call it opportunity zones, there's so many names that float out there, but opportunity zones is what kind of is sticking out for me. And within those opportunity zones, it is how do you look at this area that is incredibly underutilized and add some placemaking to it, which I think lends to what both Councilmember Newsom and Mayor Pro Tem Funk are saying, that, we have these areas that it's where people want to come. And so then businesses want to locate there. You get the synergistic effect, and you don't have, I forget who mentioned the carburetor shop, next to the cafe and the this and the that and the other. But how do you make those a little more synergistic?
Exactly. Yeah. The El Camino plan tend to really focus on the voids rather than the nodes. And it was exactly that. It looked at these areas that are in between, where there's a lack of identity and there's a lack of cohesive land use. And how do we pull that together to make more of a cohesive land use and a cohesive design in areas that just don't seem to have that? So certainly that can be something that can be pulled into policies that also draw from what that El Camino plan began to explore.
Yeah.
And to your, the mayor's concern about how the overall volume load of what's here, this seems to me like the complexity of this is something that ought to get fleshed out initially in some sense from the general plan. That that if we need to push this one out, this is a year 3 or 4 objective to really get something refined on this, probably not a year 1 or 2. That'd be my take. We've got a lot here, and I'll hit on this in the next section too, a big load of things that because staff's really excited. And I feel that, and we actually have, money to do a few things to, fix some stuff that's old and broken and to make things happen. And I feel that excitement, but we do have to be mindful of the overall.
There's
load.
always a thought, if you put it in year 2, if we don't get it done, it slips to year 3. So we are very excited about getting a lot of these things on the table. And community development does have we do have a new planner now. We do have a complete staff finally. So things are looking good. But I'll start with a quote from a long time ago, quote, "We can do anything. We can't do everything," quote.
Right. So, I would sooner see us deal with the short-term rentals things because that's heating up so quickly. And if this piece has to slide to make room for that, I would be comfortable.
That's another reason.
Is the corridor layout that we looked at, that's not policy yet, right? That was just kind of a vision of what we kind of wanted to go.
We
towards?
sort of tabled the El Camino plan. We never really adopted as policy. We instead said, let's use this as a reference document. Let's use this as something we can reference. And if we'd like to, we can pull things out of it and implement that. It's an idea book. And I think it just kind of evolved that way. And it was intended to kind of be that way, as kind of this guiding evaluation of El Camino and its long 7-mile stretch to see how we could break it down in pieces and parts. And so it was really supposed to be a concept, like not something you officially adopt. It's kind of like when you do a downtown concept plan, but it's something that helps you vision and sort of a future,
Are we using that as a vision for DRC, or as that's coming through as this is what we envision, this is what we see its full potential to be?
We see things that come into play that involve components of that. Sure, we reference it to say, hey, the El Camino plan visioned this. And we're going to do that with a general plan update as well. Hey, the El Camino plan visioned this. It thought about this. Doesn't mean you have to do it. It's just, hey, there's an idea. Here's a concept that we can utilize.
I know we've been talking about it for about 4.5 years, but I think we're already doing some of it. So I think it's not like it's something new. It's just we're integrating so much more as we go along every day with the, adding of different downtown. So thank you.
Do you feel like we're complete on that?
Yes,
City
thank you
Manager?
very much.
All right.
All of these discussions do help staff. I do want to reiterate, there is a lot in here. they are excited. I'm excited that that the team's excited. But I'm a little skeptical we're going to be able to do it all.
Well, I think also what happens is that in this, like, look for opportunities, like, being. All of
Absolutely.
these aren't going to come rushing forward at once. And so I think you have to have enough where you can say, oh, this is happening, pursue this. Okay, we're really not seeing traction over here. Okay, that's year 3, year 4. So
Absolutely.
you've got to have enough. You don't want to have this amount and then you get this done and you're like, wait a minute, what else are we doing now? So
No, I think
not that ever
having all
happens in
of these
Atascadero, but
makes
Yeah.
it so that we can be strategic on
Yes.
as the opportunities arrive, we're jumping on and we have that direction.
perfect. All right, let's
Speaking
go
of
to our
that,
next one.
On to next one. This is fiscal, hold on. Fiscal and infrastructure efficiency and sustainability. And so a lot of these are some of the carryovers from previous years and things we've been talking about quite a bit. So I'm not going to go into details. Obviously, we're always going to be looking for capital grants and other grants to help us with everything. We're going to look for and invest in things that make staff more efficient. One of the first ones we have in there along that is purchase and implement asset management software. This is something we'd hope to get to in these 2 years. Between a lot of the other projects that we had, we didn't get there. This is still very important. As you saw, even on the broadband infrastructure plan or the broadband plan, we got a 0 on nice records of our available assets and all of that. So this would help with that. Begin replacing fire station number 1. We have been doing some work behind the scenes, having a lot of discussions. We're really putting our hopes on that armory building. That's going to give us a lot more room and a lot more possibilities. We're going to still very aggressively pursue that armory property type of thing. We are going to need more funds than we had planned on. Number 1, we are now talking about potential public safety, which would move police over. Number 2, unfortunately, construction costs have increased dramatically since a few years ago when we started talking about this. We have on here developed the zoo capital improvement and funding plan to discern the viability of continuing AZA accreditation. As the council knows, our biggest finding on the last one, their biggest concern for AZA accreditation was our lack of moving forward on capital replacement and moving that master plan forward. That is a big item and a lot of money. The city does do okay funding the operations of the zoo. That pulled very well when we looked at D20, but willing to put in more money for the zoo did not pull so much, did not pull well. Without accreditation, the viability of the zoo is, I think, something that we would have to question as we are no longer in the business of saving animals from extinction and being able to be part of that bigger picture is not really viable without AZA. So as part of that, we want to collaborate with the Friends of the Charles Paddock Zoo. They are a nonprofit that is dedicated to the zoo and fundraising for the zoo. So we want to help as much as we can. The mayor has been doing a lot of work with that group, as have I, in recent months. We want to work with the Friends to develop and implement to raise $1 million in the next 2 years. And for consideration for construction of the Madagascar Biodiversity Hotspot. We are also proposing that you consider a matching capital funding for the Madagascar Biodiversity Hotspot of $1 million. It's about a $2 million project. It would help with the lemurs, the fossa, some of our oldest exhibits, make substantial progress towards our master plan, but that is a big investment. We are really looking for the Friends to lead that effort, but I think that the $2 million mark at this point for them is just a little bit bridge too far. So we're proposing that max matching. And we have the wastewater treatment plant retrofit. This project is huge. I cannot overstate how big of a project this will and how much staff capacity, even with hiring consultants that specialize in this, that will do. We are looking at about $60 million in upgrades that will be necessary. So we are looking at financing. We're looking at a lot of staff time to manage that project and other things. So all of these are on there, including collaborating with the Atascadero State Hospital, who also needs some of that capacity, and figuring out a lot of things. And then just trying to pick off a lot of those deferred maintenance issues in our parks and public facilities. It's been 10 years since we moved into City Hall. All of the, heating and air conditioning units, the roof and other things are starting to reach their life cycles. We do have to begin replacement of a new financial system. This is a have to, not a choose to. Our financial system, sorry, Jerry's crying over there. Our financial system is 23 years old. And they are going to stop support of this financial system in 2027. So we don't have much of a choice. We're going to look for ways to expand energy infrastructure, having some more backup generators and redundancy. We do have, again, considering a sidewalk amnesty program. As we talked about earlier, all of the adjacent properties are responsible for maintaining their sidewalk. Through CJPA and some other programs, we have some access to some inexpensive or cost-effective contractors to come in and basically grind the sidewalks. But we still want to make sure that that property owner is still responsible. So there's various programs that CJPA has developed with other cities to make that work. And then Nick wants to update his engineering standards, which should help streamline some development and some of the time that he has to spend on things. So we will get there. Do you guys want to talk about any of those? You want me to move on down? Keep moving. Financial strategies. Again, a lot of these financial strategies are just things that we've always done. We spent a lot of time on our financial strategy last meeting, so I don't want to spend a ton of time. But I do want to put that we are looking, and as part of the action plan, we have renew F14 on the 2024 ballot. That sunsets in 26. F14 are the ones that had an advisory measure with it to dedicate those funds to our roads. We made significant progress on our roads, which is hard to believe right now after all the storms, but you can imagine what they would have looked like without that. It's going to be critical that we continue with that. So unless there's one of those that you really want to talk about, I'll just move on down to transparency and accountability. Again, transparency and accountability. We do have our new website that should be up probably in the next 6 months, Luke. Yep. Okay. So we've been working very hard behind the scenes, and that has taken everybody's effort to do. We want to continue to build upon our outreach efforts for both Measure D20 and Measure F14, both just to make sure people know that these tax dollars are going where they said they wanted them to go. You guys talked about improving transparency and understandability of financial reports. So Jerry is going to be working on that a little bit. It is very hard. Government accounting is not the most intuitive, as you have big, thick books, but we try and do our best, but we'll look for some other ones, particularly as they relate to showing that we're not adopting big negative balances. You guys are actually adopting a balanced budget each year, but because of the timings of the revenues and expenses, sometimes it looks a little odd. We talked about increasing transparency and public awareness of the zoo. That's going to be critical to keep the zoo going. We are, and in the works, this is kind of a continuation of, but it's on the implementing online payment and tracking system for cities' fees and tax payments. And improving the Wi-Fi at City Hall and the zoo. That's a challenge for our public that come here. And those are the biggies. And if I didn't hit one that you wanted to talk about, I'm happy to do so or answer.
All right.
Listen to what
Well, what
you're
I'll
saying.
just do is I'll kind of go now, other direction. I'll start with Councilmember Dares. If there anything, no, Councilmember Borbo.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Rochelle, I did have a question, or wanted to bring something up that I brought up in the Finance Committee meeting, and we discussed that this might be the appropriate place. Under financial strategies, we talk about a balanced strategy of operational expenditures versus capital or one-time expenditures with D20 and revenues in mind. As we discussed, and I think Jerry's last presentation on our 10-year projections, et cetera, are looking pretty good because of, and thanks to the voters for passing D20, it's made a huge difference in the financial stability and sustainability of our city and our ability to hire more police and retain staff, et cetera, et cetera. But what I'm wondering is, we have a situation where we're going to have some money that we didn't have in the past. And I look at things like the for opportunities, if you will, or where can we do perhaps some capital improvements that we wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. And I look at, we've had multiple discussions about development of the Del Rio area. We've talked about the necessity for the right-hand turn lane, which has more or less been partially built now with the addition of the Taco Bell there. It's the retaining wall is partially there. And I wonder if this wouldn't be the kind of thing that it would be a very good long-range financial strategy to pay for that to be done up front. Then we have a definitive number to give to developers and say, okay, here's your share. Instead of a speculative number that, back in the Walmart days, it was, oh, it's going to be 4.5 million, and we're going to base your contributions on 4.5 million. And 18 months later, it was 11 million. Would it be better, more financially responsible for everybody in the long term, as well as achieving a positive physical improvement for this residents, to see if we could pay for that in the near term, and then spread the cost out to future developments on a known basis instead of speculative basis.
So I certainly hope so. We've had various discussions over that years. Staff has been moving forward in that general direction. Just because to do any part of it, we had to start the Caltrans process. What we didn't want to do is put all that on the shelf until, hey, we're going to get the funding in this many years and we'll do that. So that is already going, and we're already moving down that track. I think the Finance Committee will be talking about that a little bit more on Thursday. I'm looking at Jerry and Nick. Yes, but that is the current staff plan.
The key point here is that our D20 will give us some of that flexibility that we would simply have not have had otherwise, to make smart long-term financial investments that will pay off very well in the long run.
A few things. I know these are not necessarily in priority order, right? But I did notice at the whole end of the section, we have the hired grant writing consultant. And I would like to emphasize that I see that as an early opportunity, because I think we can leverage that to get funding. That might be a good, good. Yeah. And maybe a contract, not necessarily a hire, but it's make that happen. I am a little concerned about how many large system things we have, both the asset management, the financial system, engineering standards, other things. And that has a real load on people because you have to get a lot of participation. So I would be a little concerned at the time that we're updating operational processes, that we're taking on too many things that reassess or change them while we're doing all the systems work, or just do those in context together. So if we're going to take on something, an essentialism type of thing, for instance, that I would suggest that be very targeted or phased. So that, or maybe less formal, because, a consultant coming into like citywide thing or is going to be interacting with the same people who are also trying to figure out the financial system and the asset management and all these other things that are getting dealt with at the same time. And it can crater people, just the load of trying to deal with that. Or it results in system changes being made that don't have the input that operationally that they really need to be effective. So, I would ask staff to be mindful of that and to feel free to phase some of that as needed. And I think, I would love to have something that's a little more transparent than our, budget because of the necessity of that. It was a beautiful budget. It's an award-winning budget. That maybe improving the transparency of the financial reports could wait until after we updated the system so that we can actually produce them. So that would be my suggestions.
I have a question on F14 with I think they got enough signatures for the ballot, the business roundtable, which I think is maybe the soda, businesses that we're going to have an issue with an advisory measure. So is that going to put a little bit more, is that going to tax us a little bit more no pun intended, in terms of getting that passed? Would we still be able to do a general tax? Do you see it needing to be a specific? What are the things that we're looking at here?
I think it's certainly going to change our world. And I think we're going to have to hire a consultant that this is what they do. And they should be very, very knowledgeable about, okay, if it passes, this is what happens. If it doesn't pass, this is what happened. Based on the polling that we would do, I would recommend that you do a special, or I would recommend you do a general. We really want that after we do that polling so that we have the best information on deciding how to present this to the voters so that they understand what the choices are. But it establishes much higher bars.
Yes.
And a lot more restrictions than we currently have in place. Not just for sales taxes,
Everything.
everything.
218s. Yeah, it's a nightmare.
It is.
If something happened in 2024 and we went out and somehow didn't get it right, whatever happened, it failed, we would still have 2026 to go back and try again to make sure that we do everything correctly, get the public as involved in it and informed as can be to be able to continue those road improvements.
Absolutely.
No. Okay. Right.
Thanks. And I had one more note that I skipped to the back of the section, but first, and that's as we're looking at the wastewater treatment plant, and working with and we will need expertise to help manage that from externally because of the load, the complexity of that. And I would encourage just to think from the get-go about, for this scale of project, how we are incorporating the local workforce in a systematic way, because there's real synergy for us when the money from that stays local, and also opportunities to make that project more efficient and reliable. It will be a prevailing wage project. So that doesn't trip anything different, but so there might be a way to manage it more efficiently and ensure that we have, I know SLO when they did theirs, they targeted 30% local hires and got 80% local hires. And that is a lot of money staying in the community. So.
All right, I think we're ready to move on to the next.
We have our last strategic priority, which is ensuring public safety and providing exceptional city services. Your three focus areas are staff, the unhoused population, and flourishing community. Staff, again, these are a lot of the things that we already have in process. It's growing those, expanding on those programs, trying to hire and retain an adequate level of staffing to achieve our priorities. D20 has helped a lot. There are still some some needs that we're not getting to, but we've made tremendous progress there. I think that one of the goals that both police, fire, and the community would like to see is working towards 2 emergency dispatchers on duty at all times. We are not there. We cannot do that with our current staff, even if we were fully staffed. But we'd like to do that. We'd like to work towards a long-term goal of additional fire and emergency response resources. And basically make sure that we develop strategies and adopt strategies to ensure adequate staffing based on projected changes to workload as the community grows and changes. So as we do stuff, let's make sure we're thinking about those responsibilities to serve, maintain, and do all of those types of things. One of the big things that has made a huge difference in our retention is providing competitive salary and benefits and appropriate classifications for all employees. I think that is critical to be able to serve and achieve all those other things in the action plan, because if we're constantly having staff turnover, we can't achieve any of these. We're going to look for opportunities to enhance other hiring, retention, employee growth development programs, make sure employees have their tools to do their job. One of the big ones, particularly for public safety, but for all our employees, is continue to support and promote mental health and wellness services for employees. Council took some significant action last year that I know has made a difference with peer support programs and Cortico and some other things. We want to continue to prioritize a culture that emphasizes working together as one team, so no silos. That is a big reason that we get so much done around here, is that we're all willing to pitch in everywhere and that we treat each other like family. And we want to complete this is where the essentialism evaluation of each department to identify lower priority programs and activities. The discussion was, yes, it will take some upfront, but the hope is that as we reduce some of those low priority things, that actually frees up staff and reduces some of that stress from always being behind. We're going to roll out our updated mission statement. We're actually, as an executive team, very excited about this. We have a lot of energy going, and we're going to hire for heart. On the unhoused population, we're going to expand training and education of staff and community members on available support resources for our unhoused population. We did hold a couple of trainings. We worked with the county and behavioral health on providing some mental health first aid for any employee that was interested in that. Just a lot of good programs. We really want to make sure that we have that information available. We also want to train and educate our staff and community members on compassionate interaction with our homeless population. We did hear stories and have seen people throwing beer bottles and other things at people that are experiencing homelessness. We need to work on as sometimes as disruptive as somebody that's experiencing homelessness might be. We've seen it on the other side, somebody that is not behaving appropriately either towards the homeless. We definitely want to build outreach for our underrepresented, our team. We're very excited. We have now filled that position. They've been working and going to other jurisdictions to figure out the best way. We are negotiating contracts with ECHO. And we really want to make sure that we are participating as part of that team with information sharing so we can more effectively serve our community. So that's exciting. Look for opportunities to assist NGOs. Sorry, I did get asked. We will spell that out in the final draft. Basically, nonprofits in facilitating pathways out of homelessness. And basically, we're going to participate in crafting and developing regional solutions to address homelessness. We're going to advocate for addiction and mental health programs, look for opportunities and grants to provide resources to respond to future opportunities. Optimize use of opioid settlement funds to support local programs and partnerships to make a difference right here. And a lot of just support on that. Then we have consider revisions to the municipal code to strengthen the camping ordinance and create a shopping cart ordinance and implement strategies for ongoing areas of public concern, including design of public spaces. And then we'll continue with our regular cleanups of problem encampments and the vegetation management activities in the downtown district. And last but not least, we have flourishing community. Bill is going to adopt a list of historic structures and implement general plan policy. One moment, please. I'm gonna sneeze, but I can't. Sorry. That is so annoying when that happens. We're going to implement community choice energy. We're going to continue to meet the requirements for AZA accreditation for the Charles Paddock Zoo. And I do want to have you have us consider a name change to the zoo, to the Central Coast Charles Paddock Zoo. That was important to the Friends as they did their strategic plan. This is not a Atascadero Zoo. This is the Central Coast, the whole areas. It also helps with name recognition and people understanding where it is. We want to also increase, and this came out of strategic planning, increase awareness of available recreational scholarships for lower income residents, and consider expanding recreational scholarship programs to all low income residents, not just youth. We do have some people, that are older that would like to participate in yoga or crafts or some of that just can't because they can't afford that. We're going to try and improve communications with the schools on common city school issues like vaping, food distribution resources, and safe corridor for kids. And we're going to continue robust communications regarding community wildfire preparedness and evacuation planning. And that is ensuring public safety and providing exceptional city services.
I think you need to put in there to hire new people in every single department. I know.
Yes.
And honestly, it could be at some point. And I know that in our supplemental and the things that we looked at, there are some hires, but
yeah,
as we are, as we have such an aggressive and, exciting action plan in front of us. And as Councilmember Bourbeau said, we do have the resources to be implementing these kind of things and making some smart investments. And some of those smart investments may be in staff to help carry these things out that get us to where we want to be, and also don't have so many of you completely overloaded. So I just want to make sure that that's known. I went that way. Let's go back this way now. Councilmember Newsom.
Oh, I guess it's been on the whole time. At least I was quiet to myself. Anyways, good job to staff. I know we gave you a huge bucket list, but no, you guys know our heart and soul and our important topics, and I'm thankful you guys get to all facilitate it. So let us know what else we can give you direction on, but thank you for investing your overtime in everything you do for us.
Concur in that. A really great job with the staff to coming up with excellent nuanced understanding of where we're going. A couple of comments on here. As we are working with the unhoused population and looking for opportunities and grants for resources, I think we can really look at the county to take a leading role in that. If we can clarify what we think needs to happen and who we might like to get involved with that here in Atascadero, the county can play an active role in helping us find the money to make those things happen. And if we're going to think about strengthening our camping ordinance, I want us to make sure that we have places. We don't like where people are. We need to make sure that they have places to go, in both legally and morally, that we need to do that. And of course, designating those specific places will always, is both necessary and uncomfortable. So just to keep that in mind, if we go there, if we do a shopping cart ordinance, we talked about that when Heather and I had first joined the council, Councilmember Newsom. And there was, at that time, the predominant model was one that required a very substantial capital investment from our grocery stores. I wouldn't be necessarily really keen on that, spending a lot of time on that kind of model. If there's some newer approach and, if there's a business that'll scoop them up and clean them up and get them back to people, and we can, have you have to take them back sort of thing, or some kind of participation thing that's, that's not, that doesn't place a heavy load on our businesses while dealing with some of the trash effects of that, then I would be more interested in that approach.
I don't have anything specific to add to this, but since this is the last one, I think this is, it just shows how many different things the staffs are working on. And this doesn't even kind of address some of the, just the day-to-day routine things that of course take up a huge amount of time. So like this, it's just kind of underscores the number of things the city is involved in and that the staff has to deal with. So thank you all for putting this together.
Yeah, I just wanted to concur on that. Thank for all your hard work on this. This is as to-do lists go, this is doesn't get any better than that. So thank you for everything and looking forward to seeing this, continue on. So thank you.
Wonderful. I'm going to ask our members of the public. You've all been somewhat quiet as we've gone through this. I've kind of looked over and I haven't seen anything. So if there's any items, any part of the plan that you would like to comment on, go ahead and raise your hand. I'd love to have you come on. All right. I'm not seeing anyone. Tremendous job. This is exciting. I'm going to ask our city manager, is there anything in here where you say, hey, you said something and I'm unclear?
No, I think you guys did an amazing job. I would like to go through the supplemental list with you just a little bit too. I also, seeing as you were thanking staff, I do want to thank the executive management team that puts a lot of time and effort into developing these, and especially Luke, who took our very cryptic notes from strategic planning and turned it into a first draft. He really stepped up and said he wanted to do that. And I'm excited, but thank you to the whole team. As you know, a lot of this drives the budget. Basically what we do is, for our budget process, everybody gets the regular operations budget and personnel and some of those. And if you can't fit an item in under your existing budget, we do what is called a supplemental request. We then document and have people write out the justifications for it and go through all those supplemental requests. And then the executive team gets together, going through with what we've heard council's strategic priorities were, and try and prioritize them, because there's always a lot more requests than there is available money. We do that in tiers, which are big, giant blocks. We're not trying to get down to the nitty gritty at this point, as Jerry's still developing revenues and things go back and forth. But I want to make sure to find out if council has any thoughts or priorities or things that you think staff should know as you look at these. They're the tier one are the ones that generally we want to try and get to, and we believe that we can get to at some level or another. We put a range in there, a low and a high. Obviously, we're not going to get to all of them at the high range, but what can we fit into our existing budget? And then our one-time expenditures. As Councilmember Bourbeau said, we do have some one-time capital as D20 came in higher than expected for 2 years. We have some of our vacancy money and even some of our regular sales tax. We're going to spend that on a going forward basis. That's kind of our ongoing, but it did produce some one-time funds in the $6 to $7 million range that we have available to be putting towards some things. And some of the things on the list are our public safety center. Do we want to put a big chunk in there? It is those building replacement reserves. Do we want to put a big chunk in there? We have a number of things too that we have put away money for, and those funds are available. But a fire truck 2 years ago was in the $700,000, fire engine 2 years ago was in the $700,000 range. Now we're looking at $1.1 million. So we have 700,000 put away. That's great. You need to do the other one. You can't buy 3/4 of a fire truck. So fire engine, sorry, I gotta get that right. This is the list. I can either go through it, or if you just want to give us any, the mayor saying, heck no, it's time to go home. Yeah.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, we've all looked through this and it's in the staff report if anyone wanted to look through it. There's nothing in here that is extravagant, that is unnecessary. And so, certainly if council members have questions that they did not get answered prior to the meeting, please ask those questions. But I think we trust staff with what your needs are, and taking that into the finance committee. We certainly trust our finance committee members to take that input and put together a budget that you bring back to us that best takes care of the most needs. That's what I would say. But I will ask if there's any specifics that anybody wanted to get into on budget.
Not a
supplementals.
specific, but I would concur in the mayor's general guidance there, and add one thing that just to be mindful, because we have a lot of different items to be replaced. There's a lot of decision-making work to make sure we do this well. This one-time bump of money is a gift. So as we're trying to replace information systems and asset management and doing all of this other stuff, just to be mindful that we may need to phase this in a little bit, even though the money is there, the capacity to figure out what's the very best, thing we need to do for a swift water rescue or whatever. Keep the load workable.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councilmember Fung.
Other comments on supplemental? Are we good? All right, we are good. Anything else? I would ask the department head team, city manager, anything else you need from us on this? All right, thank you all. Tremendous job. Okay. Now we'll go on to council announcements and committee reports, and I will go from my left to my right. So Councilmember Daris.
Cap Slow met last Thursday. And unfortunately I missed that. Had another commitment, but earlier in that week, I was able to go on a tour with them. They were offering for the board members some of the facilities up North County in Paso. So I got to see the Adult Day Center on Oak Street, the SSVF, which is provides eligible services or services to eligible veterans and their families. I imagine it's income and whatnot. And then the Paso Head Start, and just to see how those facilities are run. And I was really impressed with the people, and the school in particular was with the kids and everything was really nice to see it, how well it was run. And the kids were obviously very happy and well fed and all that good stuff. And in the Adult Day Center also was interesting to see. And of course, the residents, or they don't live there, but individuals there, they keep them active. And it was good to see that and see how everything is run. So I was happy to do that. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. At the IWMA meeting, I was able to provide the feedback that you all gave me at our last council meeting. And so that was helpful in setting the stage, and the IWMA will form a committee, which I will be on, to meet with the county and talk about their possible return to the IWMA.
We're not surprised that you're on that committee. Mayor Pro Tem.
Yes. So I don't have anything to report on the three that are listed here, but I do want to report back on the experience that Laura Christensen and I had at 2 weeks ago at the League of California Cities legislative conference. And we did participate in a number of educational sessions and a big workshop that was joint with the California State Association of Counties and the League of California Cities, which is something like dogs and cats, living together, the first time in about 20 years that those two organizations had done a joint effort. This is particularly directed at homelessness and housing, and trying to speak with a consistent voice with the state government to have more power in making sure that we can get the resources needed so that our cities and counties can deliver on these critical issues. So it is encouraging, and the Homeless Services Oversight Council Executive Committee did take a look at briefly at the CSAC, California State Association of Counties Homelessness Report. Full HSOC will also look at that. It's very consistent with what our county has already adopted, that all 5 supervisors supported, and that we have discussed with this body and other cities. So it's encouraging to see folks catching up to where we're going and finding more to learn from. We did also talk with both Senator Laird and Assembly Member Donna Addis, and reminded them, they're keenly aware of our interest in the Armory property and are looking for where they can help move the needle for us to make that happen. Thank you.
City of Atascadero Finance Committee is meeting again this week and next for another 5 weeks on Thursday at 4. So looking forward to that with my colleague Charles Barbeau. City Schools Committee, can we confirm that we're still meeting quarterly? I don't remember the last time we had the meeting. I think it was sometime in January. And then Design Review Committee, there's no meeting this week, but looking forward to Phil on any updates on anything exciting happening in construction. Thanks.
That is my understanding. I will check in and find out when the next meeting is, we're going to schedule for.
And the finance committee meetings, are those available online at all, or are those just in person right now?
Those are in person.
In person. Okay.
We did not put Jerry's YouTube channel on here.
I really think Jerry needs her own YouTube channel. Telling you, I think it'd be awesome. But for those of you who are available, it's a lot of meetings, but it really is going through the budget section by section, line item by line item. And if you're a bit of a numbers person, if you want to know where your tax dollars are going, it is a great opportunity to really see the details and have a better understanding. So I don't know.
I do want to brag really quick about Jerry and her tolerance of a 4-year-old who whipped out her budget book and said, "Oh my God," and just go just like. And I said, "I think she wrote it."
Darling, love that. I didn't have my book with me last time, but there's something I would to bring up about the SLOCOG meeting back earlier this month. There was an item with regards to VMT, vehicle miles traveled, on that agenda that we voted on. But I did want to be clear. It wasn't voting on VMT, adopting any sort of VMT policies. I think most of us on SLOCOG are very concerned about the, types of, whether you talk monitoring policies, whether you talk about the actual burden, the financial burden on people in a more rural type community, and the impact that could have. So, from a standpoint of VMT, that is in our legislative platform to, oppose and to do what we can to stave that off. However, we know that the state has made that the requirement when you're looking at development. So instead of, LOS, we're now looking at VMT. So what we did at SLOCOG is we basically we're looking at other options for mitigation. And so potentially that is something that when a developer comes forward and they have fees to pay, or there's something within an EIR or a mitigated neg deck that potentially there is a different way to offset that is more affordable for them. So that is, it's not a vote on VMT per se, but on a way to help development mitigate what's already required at the state level. There's also, potential funding. I'm told that we need to keep in front of Pete and others about Del Rio 101 and just keep letting them know where we are. So I'm sure you're already doing that, but potential funding. So as other, unfortunate for other projects maybe throughout the county that aren't able to follow through, which is unfortunate for them. But there is that potential that some of that could have come available for us. We did have the mayor's meeting in Morro Bay last week, and Senator Laird was there in person, which was always nice to see him. And he did kind of personally gave me an update on the armory, and he's definitely working on our behalf. And I'm so glad you talked to him as well. He's been an incredible advocate for us. And I know that the city manager has been talking with him as too. So I think in the next couple of months, we should have some solid answers. So looking forward to that. With that, I will ask if there's any individual determinations. I'm seeing none. Meeting adjourned.